So I woke up the next morning and I was like, I don't have a salary. I don't know where our next, I don't know where our next cent's coming from. It's time to get to work. And man, I started wearing out the phone and talking to folks and just letting them know what was going on. And then Sunday morning, man, I had a nervous breakdown.
Smart podcast back in Midland, Texas at the 40 Wolves studio. Thanks again to Ryan Shuchuk for opening it up for us.
Yeah, for sure.
Last time I was here, I interviewed Mayor Lori Blong. Today, I'm interviewing her husband. And so this is the first time I've done a husband and wife interview where they weren't together for the interview.
All right.
So if you say some things that you don't want her to know, we'll have technical difficulties and it won't ever show up. We'll blame it on Ryan and it'll destroy his business.
Yeah.
It'll be good to go.
All right.
But anyway, Jared Blong is our guest, and Jared, I appreciate you being a part of this. Lori was amazing, and then she had a lot to say about kind of your path too, and so I can't wait to hear more about that.
Yeah, so it's fun to get to chat, to catch up. We do a lot of work with the company that you work for also. And so always appreciate Aaron and the team and the ethos you guys have and how much a difference it actually makes in the field. And so being the mayor's husband,
Which is your official title.
Actually my official title, according to my jiu-jitsu training mates, is the first bearded lady. And of course those guys love me so much that they actually got me a Yeti mug with a logo on it. And so it's really one of my most prized possessions.
It makes me happy to know that jiu-jitsu culture is same everywhere. Because, everyone, I was called the mayor of jiu-jitsu in my school because any new person shows up, I'm like, hey, how you doing, Justin?
Right. Oh, yeah.
And they're like, oh, you're always shaking hands and kissing babies. You're the mayor.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, well.
Yeah.
So that's funny. So they got you a mug.
They got me a mug.
Does it have your visage on it?
It does. Actually, the beard on the mug is actually a little bit better than mine.
That's hard to imagine, honestly.
Yeah.
That's a strong beard you got.
Well, but it's also got this eyebrow thing that apparently I do that my kids recognized as soon as I was holding the mug. They said, they got your eyebrow right, Dad.
Killed it.
I was like, what in the heck? So yeah. One of my training buddies, he had waited for like 30 days. He in great anticipation to be giving me this mug, and he ran into me at church, and he was like, dude, I've got something for you. Don't go anywhere.
Do not leave.
Bails to the truck, comes back, has got this in his hands, and I'm like, you're insane, man. He's
also the best gift ever.
Also the best gift I've ever gotten.
Absolutely, man. That's best gift ever you've gotten, to include all of the ones your wife got you. That's the way to start this. Outstanding, Jared Blong.
Absolutely.
We're already having to edit. Yeah. That's great. But no, I mean, she shared a lot of, sort of the high points of your story, and the fact that you guys co-founded a business together, and there's a lot of negotiation that went into that, and we talked about that on her podcast. I'd love to get your perspective on that as well, but let's start with where you were born and raised, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So, man, my early life story is actually complicated to a degree in that, I was born to an unwed teenage mother in San Antonio, Texas, and the place that was the home that kind of nurtured and cultivated her in that, a place called Methodist Mission Home at the time. Now it's called Providence Place, but man, it was started over 100 years ago by a lady that met Jesus that ran a brothel, and her life was completely transformed. And so she wanted to come alongside unwed, to be mothers and walk that last kind of trimester of life with them so that they could kind of have the baby and then find a home for those babies. And so my life started that way.
It's not a typical path to start.
No, man, it's a really, she showed tremendous, courageous love to make that decision, and that's not ever lost on me. And so I actually just had my 44th birthday a couple weeks ago, and it's a fresh reminder of selflessness and service and courage.
So ultimately, she would walk them through that third trimester, and then you'd be placed for adoption?
And then they would work with families that were looking for, a kid to adopt that couldn't have a kid, or maybe they had extra capacity and, wanted to love on a little baby and bring him into the world in a different way. And so, that's where my story started.
So I was also adopted.
Really?
Ryan, who's producing, was
Yeah.
adopted. There's a full house in here.
Oh man, that's
And I also
fantastic.
do jujitsu. We're basically the same person.
Yeah, yeah.
And just different beards.
Yeah,
but,
you just have
I
a
mean,
little bit more hair than I do.
Yeah, well, in different places though. Like you have as much for sure on your
Yeah,
face, but
yeah.
the other, you have upside down head.
Yeah, exactly
It's
right.
Switched, but
migration.
right. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. That's right. So yeah, no, it is a definitely a unique start to life. So
Yeah.
you start that way, and then
Yeah,
you
so
get-
born in San Antonio, and so I harassed my family that I'm the realest Texan in the room because everybody knows that Texas really that's where the jam is in San Antonio.
Oh, yeah.
We have lore around the Alamo and all the things, and so I'm convinced that the DNA of the folks that are born in San Antonio is just a little bit more Texan, than elsewhere. But I think it migrated out west. There's
it's a real shot, I think. But
there's some real Texan-ness to West Texas.
I'm sixth generation Texan.
Yeah,
So
that's as Texan
maybe
as
I
it gets,
originated
too, probably.
in San Antonio.
So, but as Texas goes, we lost a terrible battle there, and yet it's the place where we still have a rally cry around, and I think that's a pretty fun part about Texas. So, anyway, Tom and Laura Blong adopted me. They were living in Dallas at the time, and then shortly thereafter, so I was in '79. Shortly thereafter, moved out here, and my dad was in the industrial chemical business, and so he ran an industrial chemical shop here. I think it was Van Waters and Rogers at the time.
Here in Midland.
Midland, and then they actually smuggled me in. This was the height of the early boom in the '80s, and so they smuggled me into an adult-only apartment complex because my dad's cheap.
Well, there's also no housing, probably.
And there probably was no housing at the time. In fact, our former VP of operations was always recounting like the tent cities that existed and that sort of thing. So anyway, so we lived there. Coincidentally, Lori's folks lived in the same apartment complex. Of course, that was information that we found out many, many years later. And then we moved to Odessa, lived in Odessa for a few years, and then left right before the bust, like 3 months before the bust. Moved to Abilene. Mom and Dad started a chemical trucking company because of the business that he had been in. He'd seen kind of a shortfall, and my dad's entrepreneurial as well, and so he wanted to try to fill a void that he thought was existing, and so he and my mom did that together. And it was before tort reform in Texas, and so that was a complete disaster. And he went back into the chemical business on the sales and management side. So really, the rest of my growing up, I did in Abilene. And so we were part of the Little Southwest Conference back in the day.
Sure.
And so made lots of trips to Midland and Odessa and San Angelo over the years. And, we all played all of our sports out here.
You play at Cooper? Or?
Played at Cooper, played for Randy Allen, one of the most winningest coaches in the state of Texas. And, man, he's just a Hall of Fame guy and he had a great staff. And those guys played a huge influence in my life, as coaches do.
Absolutely.
And
People that look at sports and sort of look down their nose at sports. And I was watching the national championship game this week, and it was a great game.
Yeah.
I think everybody knows now Michigan's defense is legit.
Yeah.
But watching that game, I was like, and after the game, watching Harbaugh and his family and all that, I was like, how does anyone not like sports? Like, it's so formative.
Yeah.
And, I played sports my whole life and everything. And,
you
you're
say
right.
that, man, and I've so much so that I've given 30 years of my life, which is weird to say out loud when you're under 50, that you've given your life to something that long. But man, 30 years of my life I've given to a ministry called Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Mm-hmm. And it's because I'm a jock. And I know that jocks have influence. And if you cultivate that right and shape it right, then man, the character that's developed, men and women both, you can transform a campus, you can transform a community, and then ultimately the world through something as seemingly innocuous as sport.
Right.
But like you said, it's so formative, and coaches have got such a captive audience with their student athletes, many of which don't have dads at home, men and women. Mm-hmm. You've got boys and girls that are in school, maybe don't have a dad at home. And so that coach oftentimes fills that role of steady, consistent, disciplinarian kind of role, but also this unwavering love for that kid that they just desperately need. And so, man, coaches are playing such a vital role in what's going on in West Texas, but really, across the country.
Yeah, without a doubt.
And elsewhere around the world.
So what position do you play?
So I was a free safety, and transitioned to strong safety, and ultimately weak side linebacker when I went to college, as I continued to put mass on. But for a bald bearded guy, there was a day in my life where I was pretty quick and ornery and stubborn, and I really, really love collisions. So that's part of the reason I think I love jiu-jitsu so much, is it's just full contact all the time.
It really is. And I tell people all the time, like when they ask me, what should I get my kid in? For martial arts, I was like, well, the go-to is always karate or taekwondo. Right. I said, but here's what's going to happen. They're going to show your kid a bunch of forms. They're going to be kicking air. Maybe they'll break some boards. You put them in jiu-jitsu or wrestling.
Yeah.
Either one. And they're going to learn some stuff. And then they're going to wad up with other kids for extended periods of time and figure out who they are.
Yeah.
And I said, there's nothing better than that. Right. And kids are engaged in that.
Yeah.
And I watched that with my youngest daughter, who started jiu-jitsu. She's the one that actually got me into it. And she was like 8 years old, had seen Ronda Rousey fight, and was like, go and do that. And I was like, sure, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
But I watched her really flourish in jiu-jitsu. And then when she was put on the competition team, and it became more about drilling, she quit. She's like, I don't want to do that.
Right.
I want to fight. And she wrestles for the high school now. But it is amazing for that.
Yeah.
And
honestly,
truly,
I wish we had wrestling in UIL sports out in West Texas. They do in far West Texas. Kind of, you get to Van Horn West, they've got wrestling, but there's something about the sacredness of football, in our region here that kind of, I think, protects that from really ultimately happening. But man, I think, I wrestled in junior high and really, really loved it. I was scrawny, but had a lot more fire in my belly than I knew that I had. And wrestling brought that out. And yeah, it was such a great experience. And it's really, all three of my kids did jiu-jitsu with me for a little while. They've all competed in tournaments. My oldest is a 5'11", blonde-haired, blue-eyed savage.
Yeah.
She's a meat eater, in the words of my friend James Pippin. And, watching someone as elegant as she is get into the throes of jiu-jitsu, and really, we've got some great coaches in Midland, not just at our gym, but at other gyms. It's a really bright spot kind of in the jiu-jitsu landscape that you would never think, oh yeah, they've got this jiu-jitsu stronghold in Midland, Texas.
There's some legit coaches out here.
I mean, and each gym's got multiple coaches that are so sound, and they all have unique styles. And I think that helps when you know that you're having to submit to someone's authority in a thing. It's just good for your mind, body, and soul.
Yeah, and you bring that up, and I hadn't even thought about it like that in that context. And all of us have achieved some level of success. And you run a company, you founded one. I've at an executive level at Wildcat and all that. And then you're turning around, and I'm 48, so my coach is younger than me.
Right.
To again, submit's a great word, but submit to that authority and realize, I'm not the guy in charge here.
Yeah.
So it is an interesting lesson to learn.
That's what I love. There's something about community, and I think it's the thing we're always kind of all looking for as humans as well, whether it's in our company or in engaging in sports or church or whatever it is, the thing it is that you spend a lot of time doing. You're ultimately kind of seeking out community. And the great thing about jiu-jitsu is, man, you walk in the front door, nobody cares what's in your bank account, nobody cares what cars you're driving, nobody cares what you do for a living. Everybody in there is on a level playing field, and you put on the same pajamas, right? And you step on a mat, and you just thrash each other. But it's out of a mutual respect,
right?
And I think the respect that you step onto with the mat, and for the sport itself, man, it informs so many other facets of life. Whether it's in your spiritual life or in your work life or in your home life, and if you can transpose that mindset into the boardroom or into the field and say, hey guys, in fact, we had this conversation in our ops meeting yesterday. I was like, listen, our job is to come in here and tussle and tangle with each other every day, but we can't do so disrespectfully.
Right.
If we're coming into these challenging times, we're trying to solve problems or we have massive disagreements, we have to know that we're on the same team. And everybody in our gym, we know we're on the same team.
Right.
But that doesn't mean I don't try to choke them out.
Yeah. But it also does me no good to hurt that person because I can't train with you anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so, and we have the similar conversations, with teams that I'm associated with where you're like, okay, yes, we all have egos.
Right.
Yes, we all have a thing we want to get done. But that doesn't supersede the overarching objective.
Right.
So we're going to get in here. Sometimes the conversations are going to be ugly, but they're all from a place of genuine desire to grow.
Right.
So it's really good.
And what I found when I started several years ago was it was like a different part of my brain came back to life because I was, to use an Army Ranger term, I was embracing the suck and I was having to do it every single day. And I think I'm probably even a little bit egocentric about, my grit and my willingness to grind, but it put on display how weak I actually was mentally.
Yeah.
And so I really had to fight through that. And I was going through some professional stuff at the time too, of transitioning teams and this sort of thing. And so it really set a fertile, landscape for some things to grow that needed to grow and for some other things to get pruned back that needed to be pruned back. And man, it's like, it's why I love going on adventures with my family is we want to just go do hard stuff. We do hard things in our house. And that's where adventure and fun really, really exists for us. And it's why running a company's fun is because it's not easy. If it was easy, everybody would be doing this.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
And if it was super fun in the, hey, I can Instagram about this all the time and look how sexy and cool it is, everybody would be doing it. It's wicked hard. And it requires a lot of grit that the world never gets to see. But you've got to kind of internally test yourself and do the same thing with your teams to say, hey guys, are we going to grind through this? And are we?
It's either grind or quit.
Yeah.
Those are the two options. There's no and again, in jiu-jitsu the same way. That we've all tapped to pressure, and then we've all gotten in the car driving home. And it's like, I suck so bad as a human. My brain doesn't work right.
Right.
I told myself I'm going to do it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Those are the options: grind or quit. So
yeah, absolutely.
When you were growing up in Abilene, what did you want to be?
I wanted to be a physician. Abilene's got an extraordinary medical community. And when I was a kid, we had two pretty meaningful hospitals at the time, and which are kind of owned by the same outfit now, but they weren't. And so that, and coupled up with the military installation in Dyess Air Force Base, and then 3 universities, it had a different culture to it. It's still very much a cow town. Abilene is, and it's one thing I loved about growing up there is that you had this kind of blend of it's what I have envisioned Fort Worth was like 100 years ago. Yeah. Like on the edge of the frontier kind of, but education was happening. There was really some sophistication to it, but the oil field was still there, and it was just this really kind of interesting blend of things. But so my next door neighbor was a physician. We went to church with a lot of folks that were physicians, and all of them were really, really great humans. They just had great kindness and compassion, and they were insanely intelligent. And I thought, man, not only do I like what I think I like what these guys do, but I like who they are.
Right. I can drag this profession down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I really, but I did have this entrepreneurial bent to myself. And so I thought, well, what better thing to do than go into medicine, have my own practice, do that sort of thing. And then got into college, a year into college, and realized I don't think that I'm really, I could grind through this, but I don't know that I'm really cut right for this.
Yeah. Just didn't fit.
Yeah. And
Did you ever identify what it was that didn't quite fit?
No, I didn't actually. I think my business leanings just overpowered the desire to kind of continue down that pre-med road.
Sure.
My first semester of college, I did okay. The second semester, I think I made the dean's list. So, it's not like I was a dummy. But yeah, I just didn't find that track nearly as much fun as I had worked it up to be in my brain, But when I got into business school, and I transferred to Tarleton, which is where I ended up graduating, man, I fell in love with our staff there, and they understood the kind of kids that went there then, which is 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, actually. were, you know, gritty farm kids and ranch kids. And so they knew that they were going to get a lot of grind out of their students for the most part. And so the framework of the education there was centered around maybe kids that didn't have the right pedigree, didn't have the right economic, you know, background to launch them into the stratosphere. So they wanted to give them some solid skills to go take on the world.
Yeah, but they definitely were mentally prepared to be successful humans.
Yeah, absolutely. And they knew that they would. I think the staff there understood that most of the kids that were going to go to school there were going to put in the work.
Yeah.
It may not be the kind of work they wanted to do.
Being kids that are getting up at like wee hours to go 10 crops. Yeah.
And I mean, and I did that while I was there, man. I ran calves for the second largest dairy in the state of Texas while I was there. It was me and one other guy.
Yeah.
And we were in charge of 900 head of calves. We had to feed them twice a day, teach calves how to bottle feed, turn them on, you know, get them on a colostrum right when they were born, and then, you know, work them up to about 6 or 7 weight. And then bull calves we'd ship up to Wisconsin for veal, and, you know, all the heifer calves, calves, you know, we kind of either work them into the herd, or they, you know, go to sale to go to another dairy farm.
Right.
It was dude, you want to talk about hard work. It was so great. I guess smelled so bad. I remember one time going home on the weekend when I had some days off, and my mom. So, you know, Stephenville's 90-ish minutes from Abilene, so it's not a long haul. So I went back home, and my mom made me strip down to my underwear in the garage. She's like, "You're not walking into my house smelling like that." And then when you're done, you need to go wash your pickup because it's making the neighborhood stink. And I remember thinking to myself, like, man, I have nailed life.
I'm killing it. I'm killing the game.
I'm making great money doing this and going to school. So I mean, the guy that I worked with, I was his sidekick. Really, he wasn't my sidekick. And I mean, we'd ride around in his old single cab Ford, you know, F-100, listening to Chris Ledoux and you know all that. And
you were living a dream.
Oh, it was so. And he had we had cow dogs sitting between us.
Of course he did. For sure, there's a rifle in the truck.
There was maybe several firearms in the vehicle. Yeah. But you know, we get out there at dark 30. We work our tails off, get our entire roll done for the morning, and then we'd shoot into class. And so we'd go to class, you know, for 4 or 5 hours, and then smelling the high heavens. We were not picking up chicks at this season of life.
No.
Except that we thought we smelled like money, just like oil patch folks think they smell like money.
Right, when they just smell like
crude.
H2S.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's exactly right. And so then we'd go back and we'd work till dark 30. And then, man, we'd head back to the house. I had a trailer house at the time, and he lived with me for a little while. And so we'd go just get chow and then hit the rack. And then, man, we'd be back up in the morning to do it all over again.
And loving it.
Yeah. Absolutely loving it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a good experience. The college experience was good there. It certainly, you know, I ranched some for a family that I actually had my first oil field job for just north of Abilene. I worked for Salt to Pipe as a 16-year-old, I got hired on thinking that I was going to like keep the grounds. And I wasn't even out there 3 days, and they're like, "Hey, we need somebody in H&L crimp where we upset pipe and then did pressure testing and that sort of thing." Like, do you want to go work on the line? And I remember, man, I worked with this guy named Tank. I kid you not, his name was Tank. He never wore a shirt. He's from Eastland, Texas. Only wore overalls, and he was built like an M1 Abrams.
Pretty sure that's the official uniform of Eastland.
It could be.
Yeah,
it could be. And man, it was just like it. I remember all of my buddies were working, you know, what I felt like at the time were kind of bougie jobs in the summer, and I was like, "Oh, I've got a leg up on these guys."
I'm way better than you guys.
And it was my first. This was like before sausage wraps were even a thing, and man, we had some guys that were like first and second generation Mexican American guys that came in, and man, they really took me under their wing and showed me the job. And I just remember really my first major affinity for blue collar just came completely uncorked there. And I knew the guys that were the owners. So I'm like, in theory, I guess I could have kind of fallen back on some favorable treatment, but I never played that card. And nor would they have ever let me. I mean, that family was too solid to have ever let that happen. They ran a really great business for a lot of years. But it was just like, man, blue collar folks are amazing. Like this is what's driving America forward.
It's the only thing.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it really is.
And so it just, man, it was a great experience. And then the next summer I ranched for that family before I went to college, and then worked on a street crew the next summer, you know, laying down asphalt and seal coat. And I just always picked the hard way to do things. And I'm sure Lori said this probably in an interview. We have a propensity to do it the hard way. We never figure out the easy way.
Yeah, she said that there are people that go to business school and get the MBA and all of that, and then there's learning it the hard way. And she said that's the way you guys.
Yeah, we have PhDs in the hard way.
To go that direction, and
absolutely.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I remember when I decided I didn't want to go to college for a little bit, and I told my dad, I'm just going to come back and work for you. He's like, okay, and he put me on a pneumatic drill in Minden, Louisiana, middle of the summer on a crew. And I was drilling inspection portals in insulation in a gas plant. And it was so hot.
Yeah.
And that insulation would turn to dust and get all over you, so then you couldn't perspire properly.
Right.
And I absolutely loved doing that. Yeah. It was so much fun.
Oh, yeah.
I get to climb things and drill things, and then I'm getting per diem, so I'm not spending any money.
Right.
I'm living with a group of dudes, and we're just going to Shreveport to the casino. And it was a great time. I loved it. But I think it's critical for people to get that type of experience, understanding, hey, there are things out there that are very physically demanding that are very rewarding.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that affinity for the front lines has really been the thing that's set Octane apart for the last decade. Is we believe in eyeball to eyeball contact. And so the only way you can do that as a leader is to get your butt out of the boardroom and get across that cattle guard and onto a cleachy road and get cleachy on your boots and look at your team face to face in the field, because you learn new things. I'm sure our field team is completely annoyed with me as much as I get into the field. And probably you could ask any of the consultants that worked for us over the years, like, I remember showing on my frac job at like 2:30 one morning. I had kind of worked a full day in the office, went home, got chow, put the kids to bed, took like a 30-minute power nap, and then headed to Glasscock County and showed up. It's so much fun to like crack open a door at that time of day, and the people in the frac van are like, "Oh my God, what are you doing here?"
Right.
And I'm like, "What
did we do?"
And I'm like, "Man, I'm here to learn. Tell me what you're up to."
Right.
And they're like, Are you for real? Yeah, man. Like, I'm a drilling guy. I don't know what the crap you're doing.
Sure.
So let's talk.
So it's interesting though. There's a general, especially when the boss shows up, there's a certain level of apprehension, whether they're really there to learn something or they're keeping an eye on things.
Yeah.
I believe you're there to learn something, and eventually they probably grew to understand you were.
Yeah.
How were you able to sort of thread that needle and help them understand, I truly am here to learn something?
Consistency. We've got this communication matrix that's been floating around our team for probably 5 or 6 years. And, consistency was a real tenet to that communication matrix. And so much so that I think probably in 2016, 2017, we created a job that's a functional command sergeant major post inside our organization. And that person's job was to keep an eye on the troops, like to keep up with the troops, not to keep an eye on the troops in a policing sense, but know the condition of the troops.
Yeah, know the pulse.
Right. And the guy I hired first for that was Casey's going to kill me for this because I'm going to forget his rank, but I think he was a first sergeant when he got out of the Army. And then the guy that followed him in that role, because he decided to go consulting, and the guy that followed him in that role was a tenured 30-year combat vet who was a CSM, like a brigade level CSM. He's in the Ranger Regiment Hall of Fame. The guy's super decorated, Legion of Merit, Bronze Stars, Purple Hearts coming out the wall. Like,
absolute
and
American.
You would never know it. He would never say a thing about it. And just to demonstrate kind of his quality of leadership. So Stan McChrystal, who was a 4-star, who was over SOCOM for a number of years, was in town. He was the team that was kind of leading the charge with that priority Midland effort. I don't remember if you remember that
remember
happening
that.
here several years ago, but Stan McChrystal's team were kind of the consultants around that. And Stan came to town one day, and James Pippin and I went and met with him and Travis Stice. We wanted to provide an opportunity for Travis to talk to McChrystal, because McChrystal, like, the guy wrote the book on leadership, right? Like, he's a leader's leader, and not even a dispute about that. And went and had a great conversation. Man, I just sat there and soaked it in, just listening to Travis and Stan to really talk through. And so James and I kind of soaked it all in. And then we went back to the office, and about an hour and a half later, I get this email from General McChrystal. And it said something to the effect of, hey, I want to let you know that I think you guys are doing a great job, and it looks like you've built a really great ethos. And I want to let you know that Ranger James Pippin, which is what he calls him still, which is hysterical to me. When I think of leadership, I think of two guys, Mike Hall, who was McChrystal's CSM, and Ranger James Pippin. And I printed that email out, and I walked into his office. I was like, what is this?
Right. What's this all about?
He's like, I don't know what you're talking about, sir. I was like, there's a 4-star that just wrote me a letter about how awesome you are, and that didn't even come up in your interview?
Right.
He was like, the man's just being polite, sir. And I was like, Pip, come on.
Yeah.
And so we wanted, I say all that to really kind of get at this idea. Like, we wanted to be engaging our team with a different level of leadership and care than they would from like a typical superintendent kind of role. You know what I mean? And so, and Pip had a little bit of oil field background before we hired him too. And that really, that continued to help transform our organization, and just this bridging of the boardroom and the field that had really become part of our operational cadence and mantra that was a reality of Octane really in the height of our kind of consulting days. And man, we've always tried to find combat vets. I've got a little bit of soft spot in my heart for Force Recon guys in the Marine Corps and Rangers particularly, because their small unit leadership skills are unique, and they don't stress out under pressure. They're so cool-headed about things and very calculating. And man, we need that in the oil patch. You know, we need good
and
leadership.
they can also be independent thinkers too.
Absolutely.
Rather than and not taking a shot, there's a place for your frontline soldier,
right?
Your grunt also. Those guys generally follow orders
right
to the letter.
Yeah.
Those guys you're talking about, the Force Recon guys, and those, because I interviewed a guy named Chad Robichaux.
Oh yeah, I know Chad. In fact, my 17-year-old interviewed him last Friday for her senior thesis here
Chad's
at MCA.
the best.
Oh, Chad's great, man.
He lives just.
Chad's the reason I do jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, he's the reason a lot of people do jiu-jitsu, I'd imagine. But I got to interview him, and you realize as a Force Recon Marine, those guys are spending a tremendous amount of time alone,
Right.
or in his case with his interpreter Aziz. But
Right.
they're having to do a lot of independent reasoning and thinking.
Yeah,
and that's exactly what you need. You need somebody that, okay, I get the overriding mission that we're on. I'm going to execute that the way I need to execute that, understanding this is where I got to get to.
Right, right. And so getting to leverage that body of experience of challenging environments and leadership in those kinds of environments just made us a better team. And I remember telling both of those guys, you know, when they came on, I said, listen, I need you to not pull punches. Like, your job is to walk into my office at the end of the week, shut the door, and let me have it about where we need to get better. And both of those guys, I mean, I remember their kind of faces when I told them that was really their primary task. And they're like, are you sure?
You understand what you're asking
and I
for.
said, yes, I understand what I'm asking. And there were many Fridays, man, they come in and shut that door, and I'd take a good butt chewing from them. But I know it was in respect and love, because they wanted us to get better. And, you know, I think the more industry can identify those folks and welcome them into their organizations, knowing that their ethos is a little bit different, and that you're going to have to engage them where they are, it will make our collective teams so much better. On top of that, you're engaging warriors that have, you know, put their lives on the line for however many years they elected to do it. But our tax dollars train them to be awesome. So why would we not leverage that skill in industry to be better? You know what I mean?
And the things that we think are stressful of combat
Oh
vets,
my
like,
God,
are you
he's
kidding
like-
me?
Oh yeah. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times, we had a situation spiral out of control and they're like, hey, listen, boss, no one's shooting at me today. We're good. I was like,
Yeah. I hired a buddy of mine that's a
crazy.
Marine, spent a lot of time in Afghanistan and then went back over as a civilian, flying UAVs in
Right.
Afghanistan. And I hired him to be a safety rep for me. And we were interviewing, and he was interviewing with the COO and me. And the COO was Marine as well. And he said, so there might be some times you got to spend quite a bit of time out in the field and this and that. He goes, let me ask you a question. Is there going to be anybody shooting at me? And he said, no. I said, well, I'm good. And I thought,
right.
well, that's a low bar. That's that's awesome.
Yeah.
But
Unless
no,
you're in South Texas, then that may be a different ballgame.
well, now especially, but yeah, that's right. That's right. That's a fair point. But so at what point in your development in college and all of that did you start thinking, man, I want to run my own business? And what was the first kind of business you thought you wanted to get into as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, good question. I knew pretty quickly after I transferred to Stephenville that was kind of the road I wanted to go down. So my mom's folks were entrepreneurs. My granddad, he took over a family business so he was third generation in a rural telephone co-op business. Except it wasn't a co-op; it was just a rural telephone business in Palapina County. And he and my grandmother, for a lot of years, they took what had been entrusted to them and they really grew it. And my granddad was one of my very, very best friends and mentor, just a great mentor. And I'm glad my mom and dad turned me loose with him the way they did when I was young, because I learned about work ethic and ingenuity. And he was an inventor and but he understood people. And I thought, man, I love the life they have, and I'm sure that I'm not. When you're a grandkid, you don't know all the dirt.
No,
Your granddad and your grandma are like superheroes typically, and so they can do no wrong, and so you're just soaking it all in, and so I got I ranch. Part of the reason I went to Tarleton was so that I could ranch with him while he was still of age and health to be able to do that. And so I would drive up. I worked for them 4 days a week and went to school 2 days a week. And so I would drive up. We'd meet out just north of Gordon, is where our families ranch cattle, raise cattle, and then I would stay at their house, some nights a week and get 3 really good square meals. And
finally get to eat a little bit.
Oh man, it was so great. It was a really fantastic experience. But all that time, I was like. I was building some entrepreneurial chops that I didn't know that was developing at the time, but I was gleaning and listening to a lot of lessons, especially how do you manage people? How do you lead people? How do you care for a team that doesn't ever want to go work for somebody else? And so probably a year and a half into my time at Tarleton, I really kind of started honing in. One of my cousins married into the family that started Chicken Express. And I liked their model. I thought it was pretty. I liked the kinds of towns that they found themselves in. 25 years ago.
You talking about like that franchise model?
Yeah,
you like that?
but
Okay.
but they were the franchisor.
Right. Yeah.
And so, but Richard Stewart, the guy that started that company, he just kind of did it in a really bootstrappy way.
So Chicken Express is my go-to. My kids say Cane's. They don't have gravy. You can't call yourself a chicken strip place if you don't have gravy.
And I mean, I'm obviously a little partial, and I don't put Chicken Express and Chick-fil-A, like they're not in the same bucket of the world.
Parallel
right?
lanes. They both have chicken.
Yes, both have Yardbird, and that's kind of where the similarity stops.
Agreed.
Yeah. And so, but that would be like, a Vietnamese place and a Thai place. Like they would be utterly offended if you said they're
not the same thing. Yeah.
They're radically different, right? And yet they have the same base elements to them.
Jesus loves Chick-fil-A. Regular old people love Chicken Express.
Yes.
It's way,
And Chick-fil-A
You
is
categorize it one way or
evangelical
the other.
crack cocaine, man. I don't know what they put in their chicken, but they're
so
killing
good
it.
they don't even have to open up one
it's
day.
funny, that we bring those guys up, particularly like the Cathy family. You want to talk about a company that understands ethos. Those guys, everybody needs to sit at the feet of the Cathy family and just take notes, because they make more money doing it with one less day than anybody else in the business.
It's remarkable. I remember there's a comedian, I can't remember who it was, but they were talking about, imagine that board meeting when they're like, how are we going to increase our sales? Like, well, we could open up the other half of the weekend if you want to, you know, like, they're like, nah, something
happening.
else. Let's do something
happening.
else. Yeah.
No. And I think, just even understanding what corporate philanthropy needs to look like, at least from the spirit of it all, of understanding like, hey, we want to be wildly generous with the proceeds of these companies to be a blessing to the people around us. And for us as a company, even, our core, our why we show up to work is to enable human flourishing. And that's not just a pithy statement. Like, we want our team to thrive. We want our team to flourish. We want our vendor community to flourish. We want our working interest owners to flourish and our royalty interest, owners. We want the mineral owners and mineral estate to flourish. Like, there's so much capacity for us to add value to people's lives by doing our work with excellence that's why we show up to work. And if we do it well, and we get to ultimately drive down kind of the global cost of energy and create an opportunity for its accessibility, even with our little sliver that we're contributing compared to all, the behemoths out here, I think that's a right and noble reason to wake up and go to work every day.
I can't think of a more noble reason to do it. And to truly place that there is only going to elevate everyone involved.
Yeah, we agree wholeheartedly.
I think that's the point that, sometimes people miss that if we're doing all of these things and we're elevating all these people, it's going to elevate everybody. It's not just it's not self-serving.
Right.
Yes, we get elevated in the process as a result of everyone else rising.
Right.
So
right.
it's a fantastic.
And I think it's one of the things I love so much about the Permian, particularly, is there's a purity to the entrepreneurial ethos here that's driven by the wildcatter spirit ultimately, but like free market capitalism thrives in the Permian like it does in few other places on planet Earth. And the thing I love about it is you don't have to have the background, you don't have to have the resources, but if you're willing to use your head and bust your rear end, it creates opportunity. People will bet on you because they love someone that's going to put their fanny on the line. Mm-hmm. Like this place is great because people understand skin in the game in a way that few other places really understand it.
Probably unlike most other places.
Yeah.
To be honest, my dad owned businesses my whole time as a kid, and
right.
I talked to Lori
right.
about in the early '80s, remembering running the auction slips when he auctioned a business off because everything fell apart, and then he worked for another company for a period of time and then started a business again. Right. And it's just the way it goes. I know that's your story as well.
Yeah,
she shared that part. So you started.
Yeah. So sorry, I kind of derailed the question there.
So that's my job, is to make sure that we get back where we're going, which sometimes I get caught up in it, but so that's when you're kind of getting to spend time with your grandparents and those type of things. You start growing that entrepreneurial idea. Where did that entrepreneurial idea go when you said, I think I wanted, and you looked at franchising? And so was that kind of your first iteration?
Relationally, I had an inside track, particularly to that business. And so for a problems course while I was still at Tarleton, I worked on site selection. The whole gamut of essentially standing up a Chicken-E. And Richard and Nancy Stewart, who are the founders of Chicken Express, were just really patient and gracious with me then, and probably a little bit annoyed because I was annoying about it. And their son Ricky, who's my cousin's husband, he's 4 years ahead of me in school, and so he was kind of already out and doing it. And so I thought, okay, well, let's give this a go. So I even took a stint at one of their franchisees' places there in Stephenville, trying to learn the business. Like, I mean, from ground up, like, hey, I want to understand what the dishwasher does
Sure.
on up. And the guy that's a franchisee there was also very, very gracious and patient in letting me learn. And he, I mean, he kind of gave me an opportunity to kind of learn in a different way because of Richard and Nancy and the relationship with them. And I mean, I know that you and Lori talked about this, but I can't sit here and say like, man, I've created all this opportunity for myself. I have so many relationships that were put into my life that I had nothing to do with, that maybe the only thing that I had to do with it was ask. But even then, some of them nudged, and those critical relationships have all been inflection points, in my professional life and personal life, both. And so Richard and Nancy kind of blessed that. Richard really helped me kind of think through site selection. I don't know if if you go back and forth on I-20 very much, but there's a Cracker Barrel in Abilene where it was a field when I was in school. And Richard and I actually pitched that location to put Chicken Express. And it was before Abilene had a Chicken Express. And we picked that location, and he kind of walked me through how to do the real estate part. And then, it was, so I did that as a problems course in college, and it kind of really put some teeth around it. I ended up getting a decent grade on it. I felt like I was kind of cheating, even though I wasn't. I just had so many more resources than my fellow students
Right.
did.
Yeah. You happen to have some connections.
A little bit of, I was following a recipe,
Sure.
instead of coming up with a recipe.
A proven one.
A really proven one for that matter. And they were only in Texas at the time, and they weren't really, really big. And so it was just a unique time to learn. And so I got out of school. So I graduated college in 2002. So 9/11 happened my senior year in the fall. And I remember all the guys and gals that, I was going to school that I was friends with kind of the year before. Man, they got out and they went to work for Bechtel and KBR. And I mean, they were killing it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that next year, the job market, as you probably well remember, it was eviscerated. And I thought, all right, man, I don't have the resources to go do this on my own. So I've got to go make some money and learn something along the way. And all the while, I had a professor in college who was a retired SEAL commander. He was my Spanish prof. I took every class the guy offered because I was so fascinated by him. He's a great teacher. Burton Smith was his name. And he really tried to convince me to get into the Navy when I got out of school, kind of gave that an honest pass, and then got a call from a Marine Corps captain the fall of that year after I had graduated. So I was actually working at Chicken Express with another one of my cousins that did end up getting into the business right after I graduated from school, and over in the Weatherford area, and he had Benbrook and a couple other stores that he was working on. And so I was really running down that path in earnest, and we kind of had a work-life falling out as cousins at the time. I mean, we're good, but it was, just immaturity on my part.
It's
for the
one of
most
those
part.
things.
Yeah, no, it really is. And it was, I'm kind of glad that it unfolded the way it did, even though it was really uncomfortable at the time. So I did the thing that I thought I was never going to do. I moved back to Abilene for a few months and was working part-time, trying to find a full-time job. And then I got a call from a Marine Corps captain and said, hey, do you want to come fly aircraft for the Marine Corps? One of your college mates is at Pensacola right now. Said you'd be a hell of a Marine. And I was like, where do I show up?
Yeah, well, first of all, yes. You had me at fly aircraft.
Yes, exactly. So I started going through that process in the federal building in Dallas, right by where Kennedy was assassinated. And as I was going through that process, the company that I was working for, who you might recall from your days out here, Athletic Supply.
Yeah, she mentioned that.
Offered me a full-time job.
I made the comment to her, I used to buy the sickest capers.
Oh, yeah.
At like the two lace ones.
Yeah.
The originals, the OG capers.
Yes.
The best.
Yes. And, it was, Athletic Supply had evolved from like a retail shop to this huge institutional teams business. And so, they called on school districts and colleges and not just youth teams, but they're competing for really big budgets, athletic budgets. And so Ronnie Flowers was the guy that was the owner at the time, and from Guthrie, Texas, and might be one of the funniest dudes in Texas. Seriously. Man, he's so great. And I remember him offering me, we went on a helmet reconditioning run. So, after a football team uses helmets for a season, they have to be reconditioned and recertified so that you don't have, kids wearing a bad helmet and busting up their brain. And so he and I were going on a reconditioning run in far west Texas and southeast New Mexico. And so we did Van Horn, Marfa, Del City, all those.
Did you eat at Chewy's in Van Horn?
Oh, dude.
Chewy's the best burritos ever.
So a funny story about our old friends. Chewy's actually pulled a gun on me before. His son was the AD at Van Horn.
Yeah.
And so I walked into Chewy's with a bat one time. And Chewy and I had already gotten to know each other. And he had a little Walter PPK sticking in his front belt. Like a total gangster, man.
Yeah, and we call that the Israeli holster.
Yeah, totally. And I walked in with that belt, with that bat, and I was like, "Hey, is Paul around?" And he pulled a gun on me, and he's like, "Yeah, he's in the back room." He puts the gun back.
Real interesting response to that question.
I was like, "Chewy, come on, man, you can't be doing that."
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Best gorditas in West Texas. So anyway, I went on this run with Ronnie. And we got back to Midland, and he said, "Hey, I want you to manage all of our far west Texas territory." And he told me he was going to pay me, and it was on a draw basis. So it was like really a 100% commission gig, but to help you get started, they at least let you kind of work against it.
Yeah.
And he said, "But you need to buy a different vehicle than what you've got, and I'll co-sign that vehicle so you can go get because we need you to drive a Suburban, so you can haul this crap around." And I was like, "Okay, let me think about it." And so, I've got this flight school thing, Marine Corps, kind of floating around in the back of my mind that has a lot of uncertainty to it because you can go through OCS, and then
a recruiter would never tell you something that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, of course they would.
We all know that.
They would never do that.
We all know that.
And so, I was like, man, I can make it through OCS and do fine, and I maybe end up in a tank company for all I know.
Maybe end up guarding a hangar somewhere.
Right, exactly. And so I was like, man, I don't really want to do this. One backward tracking fact. All of the jobs that I had applied for to date after I graduated from school were not in the U.S.
Oh.
So I studied international trade at Tarleton and was a couple classes short of a double major in Spanish. I love Latin America. And I studied abroad, and I did not want to come home. Like, super didn't want to come home.
Where's your country of choice?
Right now?
Well,
back then
and now.
Yeah, so I love Mexico, man, because it's got so much potential.
Oh, it really does.
It has so much potential.
Mexico is cool.
And it's part of how I ended up in El Paso, just my affinity for Mexico, generally speaking. But so I studied in Guatemala and I developed some really, really great friendships there with some upper crust folks too. I mean, one of them had a shoe company, another one had all the McDonald's franchise, another one had the Bandag rights for all of Central America. Like, these were not,
right. They're not selling chicle on the streets.
Exactly. And so I just had some accessibility to understand how industry worked in Central America with those folks. I just love it, man. Latin America is like, the people are so great. The culture is fantastic. I mean, they've fought this kind of corruption thing for so long, and yet the people are so resilient, And one of the things I love so much about Texas is we're Latin America. That's where we started, man.
Sure. Yeah, no, you're
and
right.
So to deny that is just lying to ourselves.
Well, yeah, you are definitely shading the truth a bit to deny that for sure.
And so, we're Texicans, and that was what it was before it became Texas, and that's what the people were, and I've really embraced that, really even from my early days as a kid and playing soccer and just kind of falling in love with the culture itself. But so I had some exposure to Argentina, and didn't really. I think the Argentine people are really, really cool.
Outstanding.
They're like
wine.
this great blend of Italian, Spanish.
Outstanding wine.
Yeah, great wine.
Malbec wines are
great
so
hunting. So I hear. I've never been, but it's certainly something I'm
to where
to go hunting in Argentina.
I haven't gotten to hunt.
Yeah,
there.
So I hear it's great down there. But yeah, so Central America was really kind of where I was thinking, but I applied for jobs kind of entry-level management jobs all over Latin America. And didn't get any of them. And so when Ronnie offered me to take this job in El Paso, I was like, well, that's close. I mean, it's,
It's good
it's
enough.
on the border.
It's good enough.
So we'll start there, and maybe something can happen. And something did happen. So I worked for him for several years and grew the territory and really kind of fell in love with that business and the people of that business. I mean, because you're calling on coaches, man.
Right.
And so I was in locker rooms all over far west Texas and southeast New Mexico, and got to hang out with some guys at UTEP along the way and gals. And they're starting. I think they started a softball program. Kind of was there, and they had a Hall of Fame track coach out there that I got to spend a little bit of time with. It was a really great kind of first gig, because there was no one out there driving me. I was having to be a self-starter,
Self-reliant.
get up in the morning, make calls, do paperwork, which I absolutely sucked at. And Ted Flowers would tell you to this day that I was really, really terrible at upholding my end of the bargain on that. But I really, really love selling. And I was like, I'm an all-in kind of guy about all parts of my life. Like, I was so committed. Nike had come out with a new fabric back then, and no one had seen it yet. And Mizzou was testing it out like the season. It was a wrestling singlet, actually. And they were testing it out. It was
By the way, worst uniform for sports ever. The singlet.
Worst uniform ever. But I was so committed to selling gobs of this thing that I put it on in a locker room in Clint, Texas. And the AD there said, I am never going to buy something from anybody else because you had the balls to do that.
And he saw them in the singlet.
He saw me.
It's the worst.
Oh, yeah. He saw all of me in the singlet.
Yeah.
He saw all of me in the singlet.
I have, with my daughter wrestling, I'm on the record for years now saying, why aren't they wearing shorts and a rash guard?
Yeah.
That's the uniform.
Yes,
Just
absolutely.
go no-gi.
Yeah.
But the singlet.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Rough to look at.
Oh, yeah, man. But so anyway, that kind of season of my life, I joke about being a jock strap peddler, that I was an athletic supporter in all the senses of the words. But it started this part of my career of upselling stuff. Like, I always wanted to sell the better thing, right? Or I always wanted to be a part of the better thing.
Right.
Not because it was elitist, but because I saw the value in it. And it transformed my thinking about, hey, let's think about value purchasing as opposed to price purchasing. And I really haven't wavered from that, frankly, to my team's great annoyance at times. But spending the right money on the right thing at the right time really, really matters. I don't care what business you're in, right? And so do the research, find out what generates meaningful value to whatever it is the thing you're doing, and then buy that thing so that it can add value to the organization, even if it's just, you get in the kind of the uniform uni business, and there's some Deion Sanders is the master of this, right? Because he understands that it is a part of the ethos,
right?
And that was not really a thing 20-something years ago, but it has become a thing, and I understood that, but the guys didn't have the budgets for that.
Really, the first time I really started noticing the uniform stuff was with Oregon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they had a different uniform and helmet combination.
Right.
And you kept looking at that and you're like, those are sick. And not all of them were great.
Right.
But then you're like, 100% kids are going to play football there because of the uniform, period.
Yes, because it's the Nike school.
Correct.
And I think if we think that's not a big deal, especially in the oil and gas business, right? Like, we want to act like that's relegated to other industries. We have to understand that our corporate brands, they actually need to matter to us. And the thing that I think we've wrestled with as an industry, because we're filled with so many great technical experts, is kind of the soft skills of the business, right? And so marrying those things together, like, there's been some guys that have just crushed that over the years. Clady is a great example. Like, Clady understood the Wildcatter spirit. He had this ethos in his organization, just constantly driving innovation, deal making, that sort of thing. Harold Ham's the same way at Continental, man, just driving innovation, driving passion for the business, inviting the next generation. But I would say the guys like that are the exception to the rule. across the industry, whether you're in the E&P side or the service sector, either one. Glenn Patterson and Clovis Talbot are another great example, with Patterson. Those guys understood we're not just building a machine here. We're building a team that's going to crush everybody.
Right. You know what's interesting about those guys? How many times have you heard people sort of naysay what they were doing?
Oh, yeah.
The old traditional, like, God, that guy's kind of a nose. He'd stop talking. He's annoying,
Right.
whatever. When if they stopped and really understood what was happening, you're building something
Right.
that is a brand.
And I think another local company that you could really point to, and a guy that did a really, really great job of it that's just recently passed, is Jim Henry. Jim had a one-track mission in his professional life, and it oozed into all the other parts of his life. But we're going to do this great thing, and I don't really care if we get recognition for it, but we're going to build a fantastic company. And whether they transacted a deal or they were just plowing ahead and drilling wells, he and Paula upheld, like they never wavered with who they were or are, as people, and it just infiltrated every part of that company, which is what made Henry great for its 50-year history, and they sucked us into that as a company. Like we got to drill every horizontal well that Jim Henry drilled from the time they started in 2013 until we sold that part of our consulting business in 2020. It was a fantastic adventure together.
Yeah.
And we learned so much from them, and they probably didn't learn a lot from us, except maybe what not to do. But that culture even extended to their vendor community. And it's like you're saying, like people are like, oh, why are you doing that? It's not really all that big a deal. It's not that important. No, it's transformational. That's how important it is.
It really is. And I think in a lot of ways, all of the negative, publicity and things that oil and gas get is because we've not done a great job of branding what we really are.
Yeah.
And that is literally what has lifted the world out of poverty.
Absolutely.
And will continue to do so forever.
Yeah. And I think, I wrote a post about this the other day, actually. It's like, hey, we don't need to congratulate ourselves for the grease being there because we didn't put it there.
Correct.
We don't need to congratulate ourselves for the hydrocarbon molecule being awesome because we didn't make it. But we have figured out how to extract it, and we know how to do so responsibly.
We are making it available.
And we're making it available. And so, by God, we've got to tell that story.
Right.
And we've got to engage the market where the market is and not abdicate our role as an industry in transforming how the world views energy and the energy matrix at large. And I think you can't just entrust that to one guy like Alex Epstein. He's not even an industry guy. And he's done a fantastic job, and I'm so grateful for the catalyst that he's become for frontline workers and CEOs alike. But he's one guy.
And if I remember correctly, he set out in the beginning to try to prove the opposite theory.
Yeah, absolutely. And then fell in love with the hydrocarbon molecule.
Right. Realized, oh snap, this is the real deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think part of our role as executives and companies is inviting not just the next generation of our businesses, but the generation that's doing the work to get excited about the work that they're doing. And that it's not like, that's not a touchy-feely thing. It's like, guys, what we're doing has balls here, right?
Oh, yeah. This is real stuff.
Yeah. And so, and it really is transforming the world. Like the notion that someone would write in the Wall Street Journal that the Permian and OPEC are haggling over market share, like, dude, 20 years ago, no one would have ever even contemplated that thought. I mean, it's the whole reason I didn't go into the oil business early on is my dad forbade me to do so. He's like, listen, we are at peak oil. This was before the Wolfberry uncorked, And he's like, man, we've had peak oil. My dad was in production chemicals. See, he was seeing all of these wells that were on hospice care at the time.
Right.
And wondering, how are we going to make it? How how is a business like the petroleum chemical business going to stick around?
Yeah, this whole thing's winding
in
down.
a decade.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
here we are 20 some odd years later,
extracting more oil than
was
we
even
could have even
conceivable.
imagined.
And the crazy part is, and this is why I love this opportunity for the next generation, for our generation as Gen Xers, but also the generations that are behind us is,
Frankly, the best generation.
I mean, hey, I think we've got, generationally, we have the best acronym that's not repeatable.
Are you kidding me?
That's not repeatable on a podcast.
Well, we'll talk about it.
FAFO is a real thing.
It's a
and
real
it is
thing.
absolutely who our generation is, unapologetically so.
And the other generations know it.
And the other generations know it. So, but no, what I was getting at is like, not only are we extracting more than we ever thought was possible, but what's crazy is we're leaving so much in place that the next generation of innovators and creators, engineers and geoscientists and landmen, are all going to have to lean on the service sector, and the service sector is going to have to lean on the E&P business to figure out how do we get this other 60 to 75% that we're leaving behind. Because when you say that out loud, that's a ridiculous number.
It really is. And people don't understand. When you say, okay, we're extracting this much, and it's more than we ever thought we would, and by the way, there's potentially 70% of it still there.
Yeah.
So...
Thank you.
So, and all of this excitement and understanding how branding affects culture and affects your ability as a company owner and all that stuff
started with me trying on a wrestling singlet in Clint, Texas.
And that is something else, man. You see, bring it back. So, but that's amazing. And there's so many times in my life now as being 48, looking back on past jobs and experiences I have. And how those things have informed what I've become.
Right.
There's no way when you put that singlet on, you thought later, this is going to pay dividends in my life.
Absolutely.
You were just like, I just want to sell this stuff to these people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was just trying to get commission, man.
Yeah.
And give these guys really the best product that I thought was available on the market at the time.
And probably was.
Yeah, and it genuinely was.
I remember I bought my first pair of Jordans at the Athletic Supply in the mall here in Midland.
Yeah.
And first Under Armour I bought there.
Right.
That was a great store. Right on the corner, as you rounded the corners, right there, man. That was a great store. Athletic Supply was awesome.
And Abilene had Athletic Supply for a really, really long time as well. And for the longest time, they were unrelated, and then they merged, I think sometime in the early 90s, if my memory's right. And, that company was started by coaches.
It makes sense.
Like, hey, there's a need, let's fill the need, and then let's build a business around it. And, so I think getting to... So I wasn't spending a lot of time with entrepreneurs while I was doing that job. But then shortly thereafter, I made one more attempt to try to get in the Marine Corps at the prodding of a really, really dear friend in late 2005. And we're sitting over lunch one Sunday afternoon. He's like, listen, El Paso, you've got one of the largest military installations in North America. And so you can't ignore it. It is absolutely part of the ethos of El Paso.
Well, yeah, it's like Texas Tech is to Lubbock.
Yeah, absolutely. Fort Bliss,
it's the society.
Fort Bliss is, and it's a world-class installation, and it was in the process of transformation when we lived there. My friend Steve Jones said, "Hey, I know that you're surrounded by this culture. You've got this kind of tucked away in your heart, and you had this big disappointment, kind of from back and trying to get into college." So, quick aside, I didn't mention this before, but so I actually had congressional nominations to the United States Naval Academy and the United States Air Force Academy coming out of high school, and found out a few weeks before we were supposed to report for cadet training that I was medically disqualified by the Department of Defense. And that's a whole long protracted story that I won't bore you with. But so there was like a disappointment that was kind of stuck in the back of my mind.
You're like, I know I could have been successful.
Yeah. And so he knew that because he was a dear friend. He's like, hey, you've just got to slay this dragon some way or the other. And so, man, I just started training again for the fitness test that's required to get into OCS, and going through all the right protocols, and was dealing with a guy that was on a recruiting billet in Lubbock, a guy named Captain Cruz, was a Marine Corps captain recruiter, and living in El Paso at the time. And so I was going through that protocol and ended up, passing my candidate test, fitness test, which I think was just PT at the time. I'm sure there was some other acronym that I'm completely forgetting. And took my oath, man. Like I swore to protect the Constitution from enemies, both foreign and domestic. Like you
were there.
It was official. And then the Wednesday before Thanksgiving in 2005, got a phone call from him. Lori and I were headed to Abilene for Thanksgiving. And I can tell you where I was on I-20, man, when the guy called. We were coming off the Caprock right there east of Coahoma before you get down to Westbrook. And he called and he said, Jared, I don't know how to tell you this, but you're the only guy in the whole region that did not get into OCS. And I was like, what? You're kidding me. He's like, no, I'm not kidding. Hey,
out of how many?
He didn't say, but you know,
I'm just kidding. It's more.
But
than
even
that,
still, I mean, it was
still, what a disappointment.
Yeah, it was a huge disappointment, and yet I had been trying for so long to do that it was like it was this very clearly shut door, you know, and I remember saying back to him because he was like, "Hey, we'll try again in January. We'll push." I said, "Captain Cruz, I've been trying to do this since late 1997. I don't think this is the Lord's plan for my life. As much as I want it to be, I don't think this is the path I'm going to go down." And you could tell he was pretty disappointed as well. But then literally 3 days later, we found out we were pregnant with our first kid. And so that was 2005 rolling into 2006. Like had I gone in, I would have been through the worst part of both conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, as a Marine. And I ultimately think the Lord was sparing me from a lot of trouble. Even if I had been successful in deployments and that sort of thing, knowing Chad Robichaux and the organization, having volunteered with Mighty Oaks and seeing the struggle that those guys and gals face every day. Man, there was some real closure actually in conjunction with Chad. So I was actually volunteering at one of their legacy weeks down in Junction at a friend's ranch, the Blaylocks Ranch. They generously give that up to Mighty Oaks multiple times a year. If
you're going to give it up to any organization, that's the one.
Absolutely.
That's the one.
Yeah. Those guys, they just get it.
They really do.
And they don't pull punches. I mean, they're pretty rough on the candidates they're kind of going through, and I can't remember what they call those folks as they're going through. But
I love that they're working with active duty now.
Yeah,
it's not just former.
Absolutely.
And Chad was very excited about that when we talked.
Yeah,
and that's huge.
Yeah, in fact, my 17-year-old Merritt, when she was visiting with him last week, because of this thesis that she's working on, and because she actually just received nominations to the United States Naval Academy and to West Point.
Congrats, man. That's awesome.
So as a family, we're super excited and absolutely terrified because of the real consequences that could come with that, right? But she's the kind of kid that you want to have a flag on her shoulder, leading Marines or soldiers into battle. She's just got tremendous grit. And that's actually what she was calling to interview Chad about, was resiliency and grit. And Chad's really helped lead the charge from a faith-based perspective around spiritual resiliency as those kind of 4 pillars within Marine Corps boot camp especially, but also as they're kind of prepping for deployments and coming back home. And man, I'm just so grateful that they've been given access to do that, because that is the Lord's work in the truest definition.
No doubt.
Right? So anyhow,
his story is unbelievable, and I mean, you can find it anywhere, but I would encourage you to find it on my podcast. But he's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, and he's a great dude,
and the tiniest human being, but will absolutely kill you.
He is a savage, a true savage, and I think the brilliant part of that is that he's got this. Chad embodies the word meekness to me, power under control.
Correct.
Because he could literally kill you whenever he wanted to.
Whenever.
And yet he doesn't. Because he doesn't have to.
Yeah, because he knows he can.
So anyway, I digress. Went through this.
It's easy to do. I could spend forever talking about that guy.
Yeah, me too, man. And really his team too. He's got a great team around him.
They're building a new office there in Montgomery. It's just right down from where I live. It's not even, it's 2 miles.
Are they going to have mats in that gym?
I asked him that exact question.
In that office?
I asked him that exact question. He said yes.
Yeah, I figured they would.
Yeah, I mean, he has Matt's where he is now
Yeah.
in spring. But
Yeah.
so that door's shut, and that's a good
Yeah.
thing for a personality like yours. I have to, and me too. It has to be so overt that isn't my
Yeah.
path.
Yeah,
If
absolutely.
it's something I want, or I'll just continue trying.
Yeah, no doubt. And
Yeah.
I mean, Lori would probably tell you that that's probably one of the things I struggle with.
She called you insane.
Yeah, I mean, certifiably so.
I might have prompted her.
Yeah, that's a fair characterization for sure. But it was an inflection point in the career, so I transitioned out of selling jock straps for a living, went into the risk management business with a great company called JDW Insurance at the time in El Paso. That was a multi-generational kind of insurance brokerage out there.
How did you make that transition? So I listened back to my podcast.
Honestly, because of jocks. So the two guys that ran that company were jocks. One of them played lineman at Vanderbilt, and the other one played lineman at Carson Newman. And they were both FCA guys. And I was already working with FCA in El Paso at the time. And the president's dad, who was an old ball coach, I think he's in this, Texas Football Hall of Fame or something like that. Probably, maybe not. But a guy named Bill Young that coached with Grant Taft, played ball back when your face mask was your face at TCU.
Right, that's right.
And back in the day. And then he ended his career at UTEP. And so he and his wife ended up settling there in El Paso. And so his son Martin and his wife and their ultimate grandkids ended up kind of migrating out there from the Carson Newman area, and in Tennessee. And so that relationship and Bill somehow found out about this great disappointment that had happened to the Marine Corps and all this stuff. I think maybe we were in like a prayer group or something like that. And he said, well, you need to call my son Martin. I was like, what does your son Martin do? He's like, he's in the insurance business. I'm like, Bill, I don't want to be in the insurance business. Get out of town.
Sir, I sell jock straps and singlets.
Right.
So,
and I was wanting to go break down doors and shoot bad guys,
correct. Yeah.
So
I'm
why do
doing
I want
this
to do
till I can do
insurance?
that. And so,
Yeah. And so anyway, Lori and I ended up, I met with Martin and Dee, who's the chairman and CEO at the time. And just hit it off with those guys, man. I mean, they're jocks.
Yeah.
They're jocks in suits, but they're still just jocks.
that never goes away.
No, it doesn't. And we just really connected there. And a lot like, I had started the other, just like, hey, man, let's give it a try. We're going to run you through this battery of tests, see if you kind of fit. And so it was like all this kind of industrial psychology stuff that I went through, that they were very rigid about their hiring process, actually. And then they followed on with a final interview with Lori and I. And like any of their key hires, they interviewed the potential employee and their spouse or significant other. And
Together? Okay.
Like over dinner. So they wanted to see how you interacted. And
It's actually really cool.
and we do the same thing. I mean, I totally hijacked that from those guys.
I was going to ask, because that's a unique thing, but also I understand it. Like, if you got to judge that interaction, that level of support, because we're going to ask a lot out of you. Yeah.
Well, and you expect, when you're going into a certain kind of role where there's an element of professionalism that's going to be required, not just internally within the office, but externally as you're dealing with interfacing with clients. Understanding the softer side of someone is really, really a critical observation point when you're looking at making a critical hire, whether they're in engineering or sales or accounting, whatever, it doesn't matter. And so we went through that, man. And as I do, I just jumped in with both feet with these guys, because Athletic Supply had already hired somebody to fill my role, thinking that I was going into the United States Marine Corps.
Oh, man. So now,
there wasn't a slot left.
So now this slot isn't open,
Yeah.
and that one isn't either.
Yeah.
You're just kind of odd man out.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it was just kind of nudging down this path. Man, really, the guys ran a great company. They trained their team really, really well. It was a great learning environment. I fell in love with the way they did business. I don't know that I would say I fell in love with the insurance business per se, but I loved how they ran their company and the expectation of excellence that they had out of all of us. And so I actually I got to scratch the itch of finally going back and forth across the border. I did a lot of work with a huge company that was domiciled in El Paso, but did work all over Mexico in the risk management space with them. And they made shotguns. They did. I mean, there is a shelter company, so they didn't do contract manufacturing, but like kind of one step closer than that. They were trying to incubate American companies to do business in Mexico.
Okay.
And so they it was a white glove, kind of held their hands thing. But I mean, those folks, they worked for Mossberg and Invisalign and just a bunch of other names that you would know. And I get to work with these guys. It was madness.
Right.
And so I was in Juarez, Ciudad Juarez, back and forth, a couple times a week. And was really just having a really great time. And then I think Lori shared with you that a handful of years in, I'd done really, really well. And kind of had a rocket strapped on my behind with those guys. And then in the summer of 2009, D pulled me in his office, and he's like, "Hey, man, I want you to know that if I didn't love you and respect you, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But the shareholders and I want to give you a chance to figure out if this is really where you're supposed to be, or if God's got a different plan for your life. Whether that's going back to grad school, starting a business, buying a business, like you have all of the resources of our organization at your disposal to answer that question between now and December."
So that never happens. Ever.
I was completely stunned and overwhelmed, frankly.
It would be overwhelming.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got a guy that says, one, what he's telling you is, we believe in you being able to do anything you want to do. You're welcome here. But if this also is not something you want to do, take all the time you need to figure that out. And,
that was
we're here.
that was the wild part of it is
that's crazy.
And if you figure out that this is the place that you want to be, we absolutely want you here.
God, that's outstanding.
And I was so humbled, man. Like that doesn't happen.
No.
Anywhere.
No.
But I haven't forgotten it, and have facilitated similar opportunities for people that have been on our team over the years, where you see someone that has a strong gifting that maybe you sense that there's a boredom about them, or like just an unsettledness, and you're like, "Hey, man, can I help you find where you actually need to be?"
Yeah, or maybe
I think maybe we're holding you back.
Yeah, maybe they're sensing it, instead of contentment, they're complacency.
Yeah, exactly. And so I've tried to, I hate the saying "pay it forward," but I don't really. I've tried to reciprocate with my fellow man in a way, and treat them in the way that I was treated, that I absolutely did not deserve. It was completely unmerited favor. And
just out of nowhere.
And that was an absolutely pivotal part of my life, because I was like, wait a second, I've got a blank canvas and I don't have to worry about a paycheck for a little while. This is nuts. And man, I mean, I looked at every grad school in North America. I looked at everything under the sun. And what I finally concluded was we were gonna take one of two paths. I was either gonna go to Acton in Austin, which was an MBA program that was really centered around entrepreneurship and had all kinds of rave reviews. And I knew some guys that had gone through it, and they were salty, man.
Yeah.
They came out like ready to.
And there are probably all kinds of incubators just waiting on those guys.
Yeah. And the guy that started, a guy named Jeff Sandifer, was a venture capitalist at this time, but he was an old oil and gas guy. And he's like, "I love education. I think we're missing the mark. We want to do this different." And so I was completely captivated by what they're up to. So it's either go down that path, or find someone that's in the twilight of their career that running a family business that doesn't have a succession plan.
So I wanted to ask you about that, because that is when Lori mentioned that, it was the first time I'd ever heard someone thinking about that approach. And when she said it, it struck me like, that's brilliant. You're basically finding somebody that doesn't have a handoff, but that's built a successful business that they would love to leave as a legacy.
Yeah.
But they don't have that available to them. So how did you come up with that?
So, going back to earlier in my story, my grandparents had that kind of business, and the family didn't. It didn't perpetuate in the family. And Dee and Martin that I worked for, that was a family business. And maybe a year and a half before I left there, one of Dee's boys came back finally. But I mean, like, dude, he had such pedigree. Like, he had gone to Thunderbird, and gotten his MBA. Like, he didn't need to be there.
He came back decorated.
He could go wherever he
yeah.
wanted, but he decided to come back and plug in with the family. And I thought, well, man, I don't have that. The telephone business was sold back in the 70s before I was even born. And, my mom and dad tried to do this thing, and they didn't find success, at least the kind of success they wanted. And so, like, and my father-in-law, my late father-in-law, was entrepreneurial enough, but he grew up in a farming background and up in the Panhandle, but he ran the oil and gas operations for Fasken. And so it's like, well, okay, there's not a lane that I can run down here with ease. So I'm gonna have to go stir this up. But rather than going down the franchising road or anything like that it's probably a punt. We didn't have any money at the time. And some days still it feels like.
Preach on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I'm just to kind of put my cards on the table here about kind of my fiscal policy as it relates to capital. We're bootstrappers. The Blongs are bootstrappers. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's our style. And it's not for lack of trying in some other spaces, but that's what we've relegated our strategy, our tactical approach to, at least, is bootstrapping. And so this path, because I don't come from money, Lori really didn't come from money, we thought, all right, well, if we're going to do this, we've got to be able to leverage cash flow to finance a deal to acquire a business from something. Otherwise, we have to start from scratch, and the success rate of from scratch businesses is
not great.
Is not a great statistic, right? And I studied that extensively in school, and so this seemed to make sense. And not only that, it kind of pushed me back towards the blue collar trades element of the world that I feel like is really stable. And so I called a friend of mine. It's actually the family that introduced Lori and I. And I talked to the husband, who's been a friend for a lot of years. Gosh, I guess Jim and I have been friends for almost 25 years. And I said, hey, man, I'm not asking you this question. I'm asking for your help with this question. Do you know of anybody, a lot like you and Luann, that have got, a multi-generational family business that don't have a game plan for its succession? And if you do, I'd love to meet those guys. That was how the phone call went.
Sure.
And I think he said something to the effect of, well, I'm not going to share your name with any of the rest of them, but I want to talk to you about this.
Yeah. Hey, I'm that guy.
And I was like, oh, come on. Because of the relationship, I just thought he was pulling my leg, really.
Sure.
And he's like, no, I'm actually really serious. Because at the time, their daughter and son-in-law, I think they were still she was finishing law school, and he had already he was an acting grad, actually. And he was one of the guys that had kind of introduced me to the flow of things there. And so Will Tippin's his name. He actually runs that business now. Wasn't in the picture. In fact, he was working for Salta, which is his actually family's business. So he would have been third generation there at the time. And so I knew, well, Will's not going to do this. And they've got another son with special needs. And so Jay can't do this.
He's not going to do it. Yeah.
And I don't think Kaylee's super interested in this at all. I mean, maybe not. But so I was just really transparent and vulnerable and said, hey, this is what I'm thinking, man. I mean, this was not like some, epic negotiating strategy here. It was just like, this is what I'm thinking, and this is where Lori and I want to head. And so we ended up interviewing with them, which was very bizarre because these are like longtime friends.
Yeah.
Right. Kind of in the back room of their shop there in Abilene. And they had a branch that they had opened a couple years before in Brownwood. And
it was a supply company, right?
Yeah, it was like an industrial supply.
Right.
It was Abilene Plumbing Supply was the name of the business, but really in Abilene they did kind of plumbing supply, but sometimes at a really big industrial level. And but tons of construction, new build stuff, all that. They did stuff with Dias and so forth. But they'd opened a branch in Brownwood because Brownwood has more manufacturing jobs than Abilene. Because you've got a 3M plant, a Kohler plant, a Superior Essex plant. Phillips 66 makes high density polyethylene pipe there, poly pipe, and they have a huge manufacturing complex.
I didn't realize that
in Brownwood, and that's really, I think, why they kind of did that and to kind of tackle the heart of Texas, Central Texas area. And I was like, well, that doesn't sound really sexy at all. So we can go. So let's get this right. We can go to Austin, which is super bougie and fun and hip,
of fun,
right? And go to grad school,
one of the best grad schools,
and not make any money. There's a theme here,
right?
Or we can go grind it out. And I was like, yeah, let's go grind it out.
Grind it out, man.
And our ultimate solution, like a resolution in that was, all right, we're going to give this 2 years, because that's what we would be giving to go to grad school.
Right.
And we're not worse for the wear on this side, and we can always go to grad school after this if this is a colossal mess up. And so, man, I remember like loading up the family, in a big old Penske truck, playing Eastbound and Down by Jerry Reed as we're leaving El Paso.
Well, that's the
to
first
Brownwood.
song on the playlist.
Yeah, it absolutely was. As we're like coming down the mountain, and so we moved to Brownwood. We're there 22 months. I had great aspirations that, I would really just get mentored by Jim in his business, and because of the geographic separation between Abilene and Brownwood, which isn't huge, but in the day-to-day operations, it's big enough to be a big deal.
It's enough that you can talk yourself out of going one place or the other.
Yeah, for sure. But I also think just the time and attention that he and I had anticipated, neither one of us nailed the intentionality of that as things unfolded. And, but, I just kind of buckled down. I was like, all right, man, we're just going to take care of business here. And, we talked on the phone a lot. I was interacting with his wife, Luann, a lot, who kind of, was functioned as a controller, for the organization at the time. And, learned everything about that business, and then kind of added some new lines that they didn't have, and really, really engaged the manufacturing, complex that was there to see where we could try to generate value and profit and this sort of thing. And, it was a grind, man. There was not any part of it was sexy at all, 0%.
Yeah. Probably fairly tight margins.
Really tight margins, but it was good work. It was really good work. And again, I got to spend time around a lot more blue collar guys again. And so all of these things were happening together to cobble together a fortification, if you will, in my skill set to ultimately come into the oil and gas business. And so it was like,
because at this point you hadn't even been in oil and gas.
No, not at all.
I guess when you're 16, that was close.
Yeah, but I started selling parts out of that Brownwood shop to like far eastern shelf oil and gas companies because there was nowhere else they could buy.
That was the closest place.
Yeah, like Cross Plains was the closest place they could get stuff.
Right.
And so we started bringing in some stuff for that to be able to do it. So I was getting a little bit of, exposure and accessibility, but not anything to write home about. And then Lori's daddy was getting really sick. And so eventually, we were like, hey, we've got to make a change. We've got to go to Midland. And was just really transparent with Jim and Luann about that. And I remember Jim's like, I was wondering how long I was going to get to keep you. I was like, come on, man.
Just the best guy. Makes you feel so guilty.
Yeah.
You're like, oh.
I was like, oh, come on, buddy. And, we've got such a great relationship with them still. They're dear, dear friends. And
that's so great to hear that relationship stayed intact. There's so many times, even in my own life, where I've gone into a business relationship with a friend and that friendship ended horribly, flame out ended.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it's outstanding to hear.
It's not all pixie dust and unicorns here, with me and the Blong clan at all. But more than not. So that... And I mean, it was tenuous, I think, in the immediacy of it all because we had to move. And man, I just took a job out here, and I came on with a legacy drilling contractor called Western Drilling. And dude, I mean, we threw chain, we ran duplex pump, tail dragger pumps, I mean, we were old school.
Old school oil field.
Old school. And I worked for a guy named Randy Ford, who, in his own right, was a drilling genius. And, I mean, the guy pioneered kick-to-kick drilling out here in the Morro, especially kind of during the height of the gas days with Marbob and Santa Fe and Burlington and those guys. I'm like, he really knew what the crap he was doing. And he was a crusty, old roughneck from north central Texas. Like, he was from a Gargle.
Yeah, I've never heard of that place.
Yeah, it's podunk.
Yeah. I've never heard of that place.
He was a fantastic drilling hand and a very polarizing personality. And I remember I'd been there several months, and I was in his office one day, and I never understood like why he gave me so much accessibility to that business the way he did. It was dangerous. It was reckless. If I was him, I would have never done what he did. But it launched me into oil and gas in a way that I don't know that any other path I could have taken did. And so not only was I doing risk management in a finance sense, but I also just got to go 2 feet into operations. And so, man, I was working 40, 50 hours a week in the office and another 40 or 50 hours a week in the field. And I mean, all hours of the night, day, everything. And several months in.
So basically normal oil field.
Yeah. Right. But, but like this bifurcation of blue collar, white collar.
Right.
Like I might have been accused of having like multiple personality disorder.
That's not abnormal though, especially depending on the size of the company. You get a lot of like, I mean, I can remember a time a few years ago at Wildcat getting a call from Don Sherrill, our COO, and he's like, "Hey, what are you doing this weekend?" And I was like, "I don't know." He's like, "I might need you in McAllister running a pump." I was like, I don't know how to do that. He goes, "Just carry a tally book around and cuss a lot." I was like, "Okay,
done."
Let me know what I got to do. You know, like I was like, I was what?
Absolutely.
You know? Yeah.
And so, you know, I mean, I think we had rig 7. I never really understood our rig numbering nomenclature because we didn't actually have 7 rigs.
It's all about
perception, really.
Perception, man.
Yeah. But man, I learned equipment because we put together rigs. And so I learned equipment from him.
So you packaged your own rigs.
Yeah.
You built your own.
Yeah.
Oh man.
That's where he made margin. Because he was, but I think it was also kind of the ruin of him at times because he just loved going to auctions and buying stuff. And man, our yard, we had such a huge inventory of drilling stuff.
He was a hoarder
that we never could have used at all. But it was really, really helpful to kind of understand how a rig fits together and not just in an esoteric sense, but like in a very tangible sense. And then just learning the drilling process and why underbalanced drilling made sense, especially out in the Delaware. And you know, we weren't drilling horizontal wells at all really then. I mean, it was like a Wolfbone well was a 35-day well, you know, south of Pecos,
right?
And you were screaming when you did it that fast,
right?
And so it was great to cut my teeth there. But yeah, so a handful of months in, like the guy reaches in his pocket like he's going to grab his keys or his wallet or something. And he pulls it out like he's holding keys. And he's like, "Don't wreck the car." And I had that expression on my face, I'm sure. I was like, what are you talking about?
Excuse me, sir?
And he like reaches across the desk like he's handing me his keys. He said, "Don't wreck the car." I said, "Yes, sir."
I'm going to lunch.
Yeah. And he just turned me loose. Like with everything.
Did you ever have a chance to ask him why he did that?
No, I was afraid to.
I mean, years later, I would have had to be like, "Hey, I got a question for you, man. Why in the world would you do that?"
And unfortunately, so after, you know, 6-8 months after we started Octane, Randy passed away from a massive heart attack. And I think had he continued to live, eventually, you know, we would have kind of reconciled our differences and had that conversation. I just immensely admired him. He was like Clady and some of those guys that, you know, from the old guard. He was everything that was right and everything that was wrong about the oil business, all packaged up into one dude.
Right.
And it was so much fun about working for him.
He's like when we sit around and I watch my dad romanticize about the old days.
Absolutely.
That's that guy.
But how I learned everything about the drilling business was he would tell a story about something that went wrong. And I mean, I was just cashing all this away all the time. And so then, you know, 2 months later, we'd get in a situation. I was like, holy smokes, that's just like this thus and such well that Randy was talking about 2 months ago. And they're like, what are you talking about? I was like, yeah, Randy was doing this one time, and he was telling me, like, so I'm just like running down this list. And these guys are like, you don't know how to drill a well.
No, but
I was
I know
like,
a
no,
guy
but I'm
that
learning
does.
from the master.
Yeah, I know a guy.
Yeah. And so that's really how I kind of fell in love with the business, is with this crusty old roughneck that had made it. He had started a consulting company, and then he'd started a drilling company. I was like, wow, this is a great adventure.
And he made it by being a savage of a human.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, a couple of years into that, his business partner that was up in Hobbs, he and I got really, really cross-thread for a pretty extended period of time. Because he was like, why do we have this college kid on our team? This guy's not worth anything. And Randy's like,
why'd you give him the fake keys?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Why did you give him the imaginary keys, Randy?
Right. What's the deal, man?
But Randy was like, no, this guy's saving us from a whole lot of trouble. And he's learning the business, and we need him here.
Yeah, leave that guy alone.
And finally, Randy came down to my office one day. He's like, how are we going to fix this with you and his partner? I was like, honestly, outside of a miracle from God, man, like, I actually don't know the answer to that question. And so he and I started talking about us starting Octane. And I was just honest with him about it. And to my total shock, he did not fire me that day. And he should have. And he totally should have.
For a risk manager, you sure are a risk taker.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But see, in being a risk manager, you just have to know what the risks are. That
what I
doesn't
tell
mean they
people.
go away.
When I was in a more dedicated safety role, I'd say it doesn't mean that I don't do unsafe things. I just know how to do them safely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly. And so he and I talked through, because we really wanted to. They were on the legacy drilling rig path, and didn't want to get off of it. Like, it was the rig 7 we had finally installed a top drive on, and it was like an act of Congress to get that to happen. And I think we finally got triplex pumps. I mean, it was like he was just so dead set on doing it this old way, and it worked. Like, the guy could cut dirt, man. And so no
hard to argue him
there.
off that point.
Yeah, it really was. But I also saw a trend unfolding. This was in late 2012, early 2013, and I saw this trend that before it really was a thing, where these horizontal wells were starting to gain some momentum. But we still had way more vertical well starts and rigs than we had horizontals. And I was like, I think, because I've been watching what was going on in Eagle Ford. The Marcellus really hadn't kicked off in a meaningful way, but Fasken and some other local companies out here were doing stuff in the Eagle Ford. So you're getting to ask questions and learn more about I'm sorry, you're doing what?
Yeah, I think this is coming here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And which was wild, because this is the oil province of the U.S.
Yeah, that's right.
And so I saw this trend happen, and I just said to Randy point blank, I was like, listen, man, I want to build high-tech rigs, and I want to have a hometown high-tech drilling company that's based in Midland, Texas.
Yeah, so this is where Lori called you psychotic.
Yes.
This point in
Yes.
the story, just so you know.
And he was like, you know what? I think that's actually a really great idea. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, I think it's a great idea. How do you want it? What, do you have any rig plans? And I'd been working at night and really, really early in the morning with a rig fabricator to just kind of put drawings together and stuff. And so, I was like, well, I didn't get fired, so I got nothing to lose at this stage.
That's right.
And,
I haven't been fired yet. Let's see what happens here.
And so I kind of pulled him out of my briefcase and started going through stuff with him over the next several weeks. And he was like, man, I think this has got legs. So what do you want the departure of this to look like? And so he and I kind of agreed on what that was going to be. And we also agreed that Octane would start a consulting division to essentially fund our G&A while we were out on the road trying to raise money to build a drilling company. As long as we didn't cross the sacred handshake barrier that he and I created. And then, because he was kind of a hothead, like some of us have a propensity to be. I did something stupid in late April, and he was like, you're done.
Oh,
Sack up your crap and get out of here. And I was like, well, I probably had that coming. And
that's fair. I'm out.
Yeah, right.
In fact,
I was like, you've been magnanimous thus far.
In fact, my stuff's already boxed. Yeah.
So anyhow, I actually did have to box my stuff. And so, yeah, April 18th, which is kind of a special day in our life. April 18th is when like we hung out our own shingle of 2013.
It was the first time Octane
So I woke up the next morning and I was like, I don't have a salary. I don't know where our next, I don't know where our next cent's coming from. It's time to get to work. And man, I started wearing out the phone and talking to folks and just letting them know what was going on. And then Sunday morning, man, I had a nervous breakdown. Like completely lost my crap when we were getting ready to go teach a bunch of 11th grade kids in Sunday school. And my awesome wife, like almost like a cartoon, she like grabbed my shirt and poof, slapped me upside to my head. It's like, pull it together, man. And I did, kind of.
Yeah, a little afraid not to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm walking down the hallway. We get to church. I'm walking down the hallway, and another driller, a guy named Leroy Peterson that lives here, who works for Latshaw now, had a company called Patriot Drilling at the time. And his brother was the VP of drilling at Concho, for a lot of years. They're just, those guys are old drilling stock too. And he stops me stone cold in the hallway. Blong. Yes, sir. I heard you and Ford split the sheets this week. I said, yes, sir, we did. He said, it's good. I've got a project for you. When can you start? I said, tomorrow morning, sir. He said, how much do you need? And I told him a stupid number. I was like, $10,000. He's like, I'll write you a check in the morning. We'll make sure you work it off.
You're like, I should have asked for 12.
You're right. And I knew he was being extraordinarily generous anyway. And, man, he was just a godsend that morning. This kind of supernatural reminder, like, hey, this is the path. You were saying this a second ago, like sometimes you just have to have doors slammed shut on you,
right? Or open so violently,
right,
that I walk through it.
And it was one of those kinds of events that was confirmation, like we're on the right road. We might not be in the right car, but we're at least on the right road. And
so, at what point did Lori say "see"?
Never.
Yeah.
We'll
edit that part out then.
Yeah, you can completely include that. Actually, she would acknowledge that and say, "Yeah, that's exactly correct."
That's true.
And so we started working for them. We did some project stuff for Horizon Mud and Tony and Ronnie Farish. Those guys had become good friends, and so we did some work on them, with their company. Just really business consulting more than anything else, just to kind of stay alive. And then, man, we went and drilled our first well as a consulting company for Clovis Talbot and CML. And, he and Glenn Patterson were partners. And the guy that I had that went out to consult for us, a guy named John Taylor, was our very first consultant. John's still with us. And, we've drilled lots of wells together, and we've been through thick and thin. We've yelled at each other. I don't think we've cussed at each other. We might have. He's a dear friend and a great drilling hand, and I'm so glad that it started with him. And I'm really, really glad that it started with Glenn and Clovis. Could not have been a better outfit to get going with. And then we did a project for a hedge fund, and then all of a sudden the flywheel was rolling. And then I got on the road and started pitching our company. And man, I made 48 boardroom level investment committee presentations in private equity.
And you're out there road showing because you want to build a rig.
I don't want to build a rig. I want to build a fleet of rigs.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
When I interviewed Lori, she said, so her take on this was a little less optimistic than yours.
Yeah.
But she was like, we've got all this stuff going on, life savings, and then we're going to build these rigs.
Oh, yeah.
And so he's road showing. Right.
So, and on top of that, we'd lost her granddaddy earlier that spring. We lost her daddy just a couple months after we started the company. And he was like seriously one of my best friends and mentor and confidant. And I was devastated. I was absolutely devastated. But we were so busy trying to survive that I don't know that I ever even really mourned his loss. And then our third child was born in July, and then we lost my grandmother at the end of that year, and then my granddad, the couple that had that I had ranched for and lived with part of my way through college, both passed away. So, and in a series of about 14, 15 months, our life turned completely upside down.
That's a heck of a year.
Yeah, it was intense, and there was just a lot of hours put in, and grinding and praying and hustling and realizing that we're really not a big deal along the way.
I've had several of those reminders throughout my life, and it's terrible, but also necessary.
It is. And so anyway, we're plowing ahead, having a lot of positive feedback from the private equity community, but so many of those guys had been skunked by drilling stuff over the decades that they're like, man, I love this deal. We just can't do rigs. Talk to these 5 other guys. I love this deal. We can't do rigs. Talk to these 5 other guys. And I mean, that network in the private equity world kept expanding. And then finally we ended up hiring an investment banker in mid 2014 up out of Toronto. And he and I went on like a legitimate kind of multi-day road show together. And in Houston, San Antonio, Fort Worth, Dallas, and then Toronto, and we ended in Toronto. And man, I mean, pitched this deal, and I mean, we had worked it, reworked it, and the feedback we were constantly getting is like, man, we love this deal. We love the ethos you guys are talking about. We love this rig design. We love the business plan.
The team, everything's good.
Yeah. The whole thing is like, we just can't put dollars behind this. Our charter doesn't fit this. And ultimately we're presenting to teachers up in Toronto that handle all of Ontario's, teachers pension fund, huge fund, multi-billion-dollar fund. Mm-hmm. I think 2 guys were managing the oil and gas portion of that fund, and they were managing like $14 billion. 2 guys.
Just that side.
And I kid you not, man, we got done with that presentation, same kind of feedback. We just can't write a check that small. I was like, triple it.
Yeah,
we're ready to go.
Well, hold on a second. Don't get crazy.
We're just trying to start in a happy conservative place, guys.
Yeah.
And then when we left that building, Encana announced their acquisition of Athlon, and which may seem like nothing, except Encana, for the longest period of time, anytime Encana had announced a major acquisition, oil went to the crapper 2 or 3 months later. Almost without fail.
So this is 2014. So
So this is September, end of September of 2014.
My math and memory is correct.
Yes. So oil crests about 2 weeks after this, and then starts trailing down. And then, of course, the infamous Thanksgiving Day meeting with OPEC, of 14. We get up Black Friday morning, and OPEC had decided, all right, it's game on with shale.
Right.
And
that's cute. Watch this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, but miraculously, we hadn't gotten a capital commitment. We didn't have any debt. And we kind of got up that next morning and were like, holy smokes, let's put this in the fridge, maybe even the deep freeze for a bit, and let's really lean into this consulting thing. We had been working for Henry and Mewburn and some of those guys for a year by then. And, I'd started kind of developing some momentum.
And that hadn't stopped just because you're out on these road shows. That was continuing.
Yeah, that was all rolling along and, taking calls, trying to deploy guys, interview people, all this stuff. And one thing about that, like we weren't a resume shop. I refused to be relegated to that. We wanted to be a white glove service provider. And so we interviewed everybody like they were our employees. And that's why we engaged them in the field. And that's why we took this kind of very invasive approach, not because we were trying to be control freaks, but because we didn't want to halfway do it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't want to stick our brand on someone that was a cult. And so we were just really, really rigorous about it. And that probably retarded our growth some.
Right. But also, I mean, in terms of like, if you're a consultant, you're used to sort of being treated like a number. So to have a company that, by all rights is kind of a body shop,
right.
Take enough interest in you to interview you like you're going to be a W-2 employee
Right.
speaks volumes and probably somewhere they want to stay.
Yeah. Yeah. And on top of that, because of my insurance background, I knew how to kind of manipulate part of the Texas insurance code to where we could provide health insurance to our consultants.
And it wouldn't trigger them as an employee.
And it wouldn't trigger them as an employee, at least in that day and age. And so the conchos of the world were saying like, hey, because of Obamacare, this really, this needs to be happening with these guys. And I thought, oh, crap, we're the only ones doing this. And all of a sudden, we thought we were onto something, but the industry was going, nose diving.
Yeah.
And so 15 rolls around, things are still contracting, oil's still going south, activity's going south. Man, we got down to one guy in the field in 15. And
From what?
From, I think at our height, kind of at that time, because we were still a baby company, I think we had gotten into like the low 30s, like 34, 33, 34, something like that. And
still that down to one is about a 96% contraction.
yeah, and it's a kick in the shorts for sure.
Absolutely.
And we had our first customer file bankruptcy. Quicksilver filed bankruptcy that spring. And when they filed bankruptcy, Wells Fargo, who was our bank at the time, not because of that particular event, but because of all the events that are happening, just says, we're out of the oil and gas service sector. So all of our credit dried up in an instant. And we were like, holy smokes, what are we going to do? And so we had kind of calculated out, forecasted our cash, our operating capital, and when we were going to crash land the plane. And so we get into kind of June. One of the Discovery Operating kind of threw us a bone, let us start working on an AFE for a big horizontal project they were hoping to do, which we're actually executing right now, and have been for the last couple of years. They threw us a bone, let us kind of earn some money there, and then Henry in early July called. They had a guy that had been with them for over a decade just quit, and Blake Braun's like, dude, I need another guy, and I was like, he'll be there tomorrow, and so we kind of deployed another guy there, and we had another project pick up at the end of July. And then Boyd Holmes, a guy that was a completions manager at Energen at the time, calls me in early August. He's like, hey, I need 14 guys. I was like, I beg your pardon?
I'm sorry, you said what?
He said, I need 14 guys, and I need them 2 weeks from now. And I said, I'll make it happen. And I thought, how in the crap am I going to pull this out of a hat? And man, I was wearing phones out. I was wearing LinkedIn out. Like I was using all the resources at our disposal to figure out how to cobble together a team that quickly. And because we still stuck with our process, those guys that came through our shop told the other guys that were out there, dude, this is the experience I've been having with Octane so far. And we get health insurance. And so all of a sudden it's like we just had this huge cadre of completions consultants, which we did not know crap about for the record.
Right, you guys were drilling.
We were drilling guys. And so we exploded, but again, we didn't have any credit at the time. And so
you're having to cash flow all this.
We're cash flowing this stuff and under super duress.
Oh man.
Right?
Yeah.
That's so stressful. Like I said, bootstrapping has been our strategy, right, wrong, or indifferent. And we had some guys
nickname you Bootstrap Blong.
Yeah. So we had some guys introduce us to a couple of guys over at C&B here in Midland. And we went over and they interviewed us, and they had bankrolled Sierra Engineering, which Joe Castillo started years ago, that had become Sierra Hamilton Engineering Firm. It was, a huge outfit. And like, oh yeah, we know your business model, man. We're good with this. And those guys, like if they had taken our financials, if I'd been on that loan committee, I would have fired the banker.
Yeah,
right?
don't do
like,
this.
They had no business loaning us a dime. And yet they're like, okay, how much do you need your line to be? And I was like, 700,000? And they're like, okay. And then 6 months later, like it was more and then more and more. And like they just grew with us and they facilitated our growth. And that, we still bank with partners. True. And it's one of the things I love about the local kind of regional bank structure is it's still relationship driven. Like you got to deliver the goods, no doubt. But the relationship is how the door gets opened. You know what I
Yeah, that
mean?
was my dad when he was running business out here.
Yeah.
He was with John Grist with Commercial
Yeah.
Estate. I remember when I bought my first car, I had no credit. My dad called. And he's
Exactly.
like, yeah, I give no problem.
Yeah, well, we got it.
No problem. We got it.
Yeah, we know where to find
help
you.
me establish. Yeah, I know where you are.
Yeah.
But you're right. Those
Yeah.
relationships, and again, that's something I think is truly unique to this
Well,
area.
and we had two guys in town vouch for us. Alex Hale and John Norwood had relationships with that bank, and they're like, "Hey, listen, we think this kid's onto something. You know, do what you can."
I was solid here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they did, and so over the following years, man, I mean, we were in triple-digit growth, quadruple-digit growth mode for like 3 years.
Year over year.
Just boom, boom, boom. I mean, it was like rocket ship stuff. And man, we started working for really big companies and really small companies, doing kind of boutique, super high, high intensity project management where we're handling the whole enchilada for some, and then just like you said, body shop kind of for others.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't let our ethos change no matter which one we were doing. And it was a lot of fun. And when we got up to 140 teammates in 18, 19 timeframe, and and then you were there. COVID happened in early 20.
Sure did.
And we got kicked in the shorts like everybody else did. There's no way we could have possibly planned or projected for that in even an
nor
intelligible
could have
manner,
anyone else.
right? And so we went from this huge team down to 14 dudes in the course of weeks. And it was brutal. It was absolutely brutal. And it wasn't brutal. It was brutal for everybody. And, I remember wanting to just go to the office. Like we closed the office for maybe a week and a half, something like that. Like none of us could stay home because we were going out of our minds. And so we were kind of rotating back and forth who's going to the office just for the sake of sanity. And, and then in late April, the oil prices did what they did. I think it really forced everybody's hand to kind of go on a frac holiday, operational holiday for a large part with the publics. And no one was getting to sell oil the way they needed to. And there's all this, chatter around curtailments and so forth. And so it was a huge e-break for our business. And the kind that you don't like, the kind that the guy in the passenger seat pulled that you weren't expecting.
Right.
And so, man, I had to lay off some of my closest friends. And it was the most brutal professional day that I can think of. I hope I never, ever, ever, ever have to do
The
that
downside to conducting business the way you guys do is you get to know these people.
Yeah.
And you get to know their families.
Yeah.
And you know the impact that's going to create. And I would venture to say, and I don't know this because we didn't talk about it with Lori, but they understood in large part, I bet. I know you don't want to do this.
And two of my senior leaders, they wanted to make sure that, like, we had a single mom working for us at the time. They're like, give whatever bonus I had coming to me to her. And that's the kind of people we had and have now. And I don't want to do business a different way. You know what I mean? Like, you want people on your team that at Jocko and those guys have written a really great book called Extreme Ownership, and then, the subsequent kind of follow-on manuals. But, like, our team understood very viscerally what extreme ownership was all about.
Right.
Whether they had a stake in it or not.
I went to one of their musters. You should go.
Oh, yeah.
They're awesome.
Those guys are
If you ever
tremendous.
decide to go, let me know. I'll go with you. Because they are awesome.
Deal.
And they do jujitsu.
Yeah, and they do jujitsu. And Jocko absolutely terrifies me.
And
I'm not really terrified of a lot of
I rolled
humans.
with Jocko.
Yeah.
And it didn't. It was like
It did not end well for you.
It's like rolling with a fire hydrant.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, so it was this huge pivot point, and I transitioned a couple months after that to the helm of a company of a friend of mine that was a quasi startup. I mean, it was an older company, but they're kind of still in startup VC mode a little bit. A material sciences company that had a huge oil and gas push called Aquasmart. I really, really loved what I did there. We had manufacturing and kind of field deployment, and we were working in agriculture and trying to develop some technology in the infrastructure space, and had a brilliant team, a bunch of hardworking guys. Got to hire a friend of mine that's a force recon guy here in Midland to kind of be my VP of ops. And he and I are like brothers. Like, we mostly want to kill each other when we're in one another's presence, but we really, really like each other. And I think that's why we haven't killed each other.
It's a violent love.
It's a violent love. And then another jujitsu friend of mine came to work for us, kind of over. He was our oil and gas operations manager, and just really start to kind of recalibrate, rebuild, and do this thing. And we went on a capital raised a little bit of money, brought some local Midland Odessa partners in to that deal. And then I got to start fracking in 4 different basins. It was so much fun and absolutely stressful and really, really hard. But a great learning experience in a different place that a space and place that I hadn't really been. We didn't completely commercialize the technology, but man, we put a lot of reps in the ground and got lots of data back. And my hope is that it set those guys up on the trajectory they needed to be on to kind of take the next step. And I ended up leaving there in mid-May of 22 to come back to Octane and see if Lori would let me work there again. And
well, now that was touch and go because I remember her talking about how she was on a fishing job and she's not very happy about that.
Yeah. In fact, that particular fishing job, I remember going out there on a Sunday afternoon when I was back in town while that was happening. And man, we went out there and we stood on that, workover rig floor because, workover, unlike the drilling and completions business that are 24/7, 365, production doesn't work like that. Those well work guys don't want to work on the weekends.
They'll take a break.
Yeah, they'll take a break, which is actually healthy. But yeah, so I remember us going out there and just praying over that well, honestly, and just saying, Lord, we need your favor here because we're in a pickle and we don't know what to do.
Yeah, this is a real bind.
This is a real bind, and we got lots of dollars sunk in this thing, and we've got a really gracious bunch of working interest owners that are partners with us on this deal, and we just want to make prudent decisions. And it's the first well I've ever lost in my career. I've lost another one since then, unfortunately, but 2 out of 2,500 ain't a bad statistic.
That's a decent percentage, man. I'll take that every day.
I'll hang on to that. So right after I joined Octane again, or came kind of, which was crazy because I actually was officing in the same spot. I didn't move. We were there. Octane and AquaSmart were sharing resources for a period of time, which was smart and prudent way to conduct business. But I asked Lori's permission, and you chuckle because I think that probably makes sense to you. Actually,
it makes absolute sense, and it's hilarious just picturing it.
Yeah,
is probably not how it happened, but it's the way I'm picturing it is absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And honestly, man, it took me probably 6 weeks to get my sea legs back, which I did not expect. But I've been running so hard. Not just it's such a high pace, but with such a high intensity, doing what I had been doing with AquaSmart, that I had people ask me if I was sick after I came back to Octane. I was like, "What do you mean? When am I sick?"
Maybe I should go. You're not the first person to ask me that. I should go get checked.
Yeah. Exactly. And so I'd poured myself into that thing, and so anyway, it took me a few weeks to get my sea legs back, and then I kind of approached Lori and I said, "Hey, can we devote some resources to doing a geologic study and then a subsequent independent reservoir analysis of our Gardendale asset?" And she was like, "Yeah, go ahead." I was like, "Are you sure?" She's like, "Yeah, tackle it."
Can you speak into this?
Yeah.
And say that
exactly.
again? Yeah.
And so anyway, we did that, and all the while, operation is going on. I end up going, sitting a drill out or two, and doing some production work for the first time in my career, and learning from. I brought in some of our old consultants to kind of educate me, so I didn't get myself in a pickle. And then we had hired a guy that used to be a client, Jason Wacker, who's our VP of engineering. He served the same role for BC operating here, and he and I had started working together, 12 years ago now. And so Jason and I knew each other really, really well. There's a lot of confidence and kind of trust that was already there. And so he's an engineer's engineer, and great guy, love him to death. And but some of those, since I was trying to get my sea legs back, I was like, "Hey, can I go sit this job?" Yeah. He's like, "Are you sure?" I was like, I think I need to.
I need to have this.
Yeah. And he humored me with it, which he didn't have to do.
No.
He just said, "I think this is a terrible plan." But he didn't. He let me kind of get back in the game. And
did he give you a green hard hat?
He didn't. He would have gotten in big trouble for that. So, because we had this black hat ethos already, right?
Right.
And it wasn't changing. I was not getting off that horse.
And here you go, Warren.
Yeah. He could have given me a white hard hat, and I probably would have thrown it at him.
Any other color, probably, honestly.
Yeah,
But
yeah, exactly. But so we're doing this kind of technical study on the asset, and then I'm just trying to get my kind of operational legs back under me, and then we get some findings back from these two parties that we were working with, and the geologist that we were working with that knew the area actually really, really well from a previous portion of his career, and his study was like, hey, if you want any working interest owners in this deal, I'd love to participate in this deal. And I was like, and my charge to him was, hey, I don't need you to sell me on what we have. We already have it.
yeah,
I need you to tell me what we have. Sober, no sales pitch, just give it to me straight. If it sucks, I need you to say it sucks. And he came back, he's like, dude, this is good rock.
Yeah, well, by him asking if to be an interest owner, that tells you how much
the
he believed in
independent
it.
reservoir engineer that we hired, again, we wanted to get somebody out of our kind of fold that we had a relationship with but didn't really know what we were up to, and handed it to her. Betsy Wells was her name, and said, hey, Betsy, and she had done a lot of reservoir work for me off and on over the years for projects we were working on, and kind of took the geo information, handed it to her, and said, hey, here's what we've learned. Can you take a look at this and tell us what we have? And she's like, yeah, I'll do that. And she took a couple weeks and came back. She said the same thing. She's like, hey, if you guys need any partners in this thing, we'd love to participate. And I was like, holy smokes, okay.
We have something here.
What do we have? And so, we've started doing a bunch of land work and really trying to wrap our heads around it. Just blocking and tackling oil and gas stuff. But, we'd only been in E&P for, a year and a half at the time. And we'd always served, other teams trying to drive value, create value. And when we finally pivoted into E&P, it was because we'd been through 28 sell-side transactions as a consulting firm where the spigot got shut off. We're like, man, we really helped meaningfully contribute to this effort, especially with all the private equity stuff that had been happening. And we captured no value out of that. Like, we got paid a wage, as it were, a service fee, to show up and to help. But that's where our earning potential ended. And
right, the real value was captured by the company you were working for.
Yeah, and that's fine. I mean, that's what we signed up for.
That's
There's no, I don't begrudge them for that. I'm ecstatic for most of those guys because they're really fantastic folks and they've done really cool stuff with that, or gone back and done it again, and we've got to continue to work together. But we said, hey, we want to make a hand at this, and see if we can make a go of it. And so really for the last just handful of months now, we pulled our first 5 permits a little over a year ago, and then we're kind of trying to raise development capital or transaction out altogether. But it's such a different animal than what we had done kind of the first 8.5 years of our business. And yet it's so not different, It's just a different side of kind of the same coin. And we've got, it's the relationship part of the Permian that you and I both love so much is when you get into a bind or you don't understand something, there's always somebody you can call to help. And 9 times out of 10, they're super willing to help. And they're going to
give you a hard time about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And
you expect that.
I mean, especially when you're the first bearded lady, you deserve to get harassed a whole bunch about things.
That's still the best.
Oh, man. Yeah, man. And so, man, we've got a bright future ahead. We, need to have an element of transaction on this thing. We've got, whether we go drill it ourselves, which I'm, as a operations junkie, super excited about the potential of being able to do that. Or if, somebody else comes along and that's got a much healthier balance sheet than we do to go prosecute that themselves, we're excited about that option as well. We should be starting a formal marketing process here in the next several weeks to that end. And then, we'll keep finding the next thing. But all the while, we've bought another company a little over a year ago, merged those companies together last year. So now we're doing kind of project management like we always have, and a little bit of consulting work, and then contract operating for other working interest owner groups that we don't necessarily own the asset, and then operating for ourselves. And so we've got this kind of interesting, multifaceted business that's never boring.
Yeah, none of this is boring, man. Yeah. It's amazing. Again, like I said, talking to Lori and obviously I was talking to her about her story, but you're such an integral part of that. And I was like, I gotta to have him on, and to hear, all of the, the path to where we are today it's amazing.
Yeah, it's been a really, really windy road, but a good one. A really, really good one.
Yeah, the best of them.
Yeah.
So,
but it's been off road. There's not really been any pavement.
You definitely need a
involved
4x4.
Yeah.
To go through it, and it's a rock crawler at times.
At times.
But
absolutely
worth it, and absolutely going to be something that you are proud of it now, and you're going to continue to be.
Yeah.
And the people that work for you, I know they're proud too.
There's a lot of hard days along the way, and when you go to business school, people don't tell you about managing challenging personalities between your teammates. It's just spreadsheets and modeling and this sort of thing. And so that's actually the stuff that I strangely enjoy, because I love the team. I love building a team and trying to set the team up for success.
Athlete.
Yeah. Yeah. And Lori is so, she's a deal junkie, man. She understands negotiation. She understands closing. I can bird dog anything. She's not our bird dog, but she's our closer. So she'll shoot whatever it is and then clean it and fry it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a kind of fun combination of skill sets, and that's hard to relinquish, I think, a lot of times, because you see other guys and gals in the business that have had a lot of success, especially in the deal side of things, and maybe you want to get that skin on the wall, but that's just not, man, that's not my strong suit. And finally coming to that realization, like, hey, this isn't the part of this process that I'm supposed to own, has been humbling and liberating at the exact same time.
How'd you get there?
Honestly, through a lot of failure, and then finally coming to the conclusion, like, if I'm going to lead well, I've got to do the things that I do really, really well that no one else can do. And then I've got to find other people that can do the things that I suck at that are really, really good at it. And so we've got people on our team that are super detail oriented, which I am absolutely not. I can spend some time there, but it sucks the life out of me. But man, ideas, creativity, ingenuity, I'm happy to live in that space. And then to galvanize folks along in that way, yeah, that's my jam. But so our team kind of fits together really, really well, like, gears do, or should, I should say. And as we continue to grow and find other teammates, we'll have to find people to, fill in roles, not just with their skill set, but their personalities to go with that skill set. Yeah. So I'm humbled that we've, made it this far, as far as time and staying in the old proverbial phone book, like Tim Dunn says all the time. If you stay in the phone book, well, then you're ahead. And we've stayed in the phone book by God's grace. And, hopefully we can 10, 20, 30 more years.
Yeah, I don't anticipate that changing. I mean, you guys, you use the word grit quite a bit, and that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Is just the ability to stick with it through, whatever, and to have a partner like you have in it with Lori is, that's, God knew you needed that for sure. So, but man, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, sorry for
sit
taking
down
so much time. It's been a lot of fun to chat through.
Not at all, man. This is what this is about.
Yeah.
It's I've been a part of other podcasts that were like, we're going to talk for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. And I was like, man, I'm just getting started. Like, when you talk about someone's life and their path to, where they are, and especially an entrepreneurial path, that deserves a long form discussion. Right. And so I thank you so much for sharing it with me.
It's a pleasure to be here, man.
And for being a part of it. And man, if there's ever anything that I can do for you or Octane or your family, please don't hesitate.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm sure we'll have to tangle with one another on the mats sometime soon.
I brought my gi. I don't know how you feel about that, but definitely we'll figure something out. Yeah.
Yeah, I might be able to get an evening class in.
Well, I mean, I'm busy tonight, but whatever. But no, for sure, it'd be my honor to actually roll with you. So
sounds good.
Awesome. Thanks for being a part of the show.
Yeah, thanks a bunch.
All right, appreciate it.